Good morning, everybody. Okay, I see lovely, bright faces now. We all get in our places. All right, have a seat. We're ready to start. Good morning. Good morning, good morning. We're running late, so we want to get started really quickly. People have texted, they're on their way. You know how that goes. So we're making adjustments in the time. Can you hear? No? Can you hear? Okay, now you can. All right. So we're ready to start. Good morning. This is the inaugural Mental Health Summit in the District of Columbia. Believe it or not, there has never been one. This was a leap of faith on the part of Mr. Hill, myself, and people in this audience, okay? I know that you know we have a serious issue with mental wellness in this country, and more importantly, in this city. Now, we have a number of experts in here. We're making adjustments, you know how that is, and that's the wonderful thing about being brought up in the church. You know how to make that adjustment, change by order of the Holy Ghost. Yes, indeed. Now, with me here today is Mr. Fred Hill. We've been talking about having this for a while.
Yes.
And the events of this past week let me know it's a timely event. We have challenges in the mental health area all across this nation. It's been televised, it's been advertised, and we're going to deal with it because we have to face it to fix it. We have to face it to fix it. Now, we're going to kick off with the faith community. The faith community, okay? Now, the faith and mental wellness issue. How has the faith community dealt with this? But first, I'd like to have clergy, raise your hand. Clergy, raise your hand. Don't let me call you out. I recognize some of you. Put your hand up before you get called out. Yeah, you know, the school teacher in me is going to call on you. All right. We need prayer. We don't start anything without prayer. I have asked Dr. Holness, you know Dr. Holness, because we're starting so late, we're not going to stand on ceremony and do, you know, just know that in this room, we have more degrees than a thermometer. Okay, and everybody has prepared themselves. And they have educated heads and consecrated hearts. An educated head without a consecrated heart is a danger to our community. Okay? Now, some have finished the School of Hard Knocks, too. We have something here for Lottie Dottie and everybody, as the late Dr. Calvin Rolock said. So Dr. Holness and Reverend Tillman are going to lead off with the faith and mental health concerns. Coming in their own way, I have no idea what they're going to say. It's not scripted. Fred, would you like to say something?
Number one is thank you all so much for coming out. As Ms. Don said, this is very important. For those who don't know, I've been in business in the district over 20 years now. And one of the things that I saw repeatedly that pushed me to wanting to do something about it was that the staff that I have had connections to people who showed me that there was help needed, but we didn't know how or where to send them or what to do. And that it wasn't based on mental being crazy. That's the most important thing that I can say. Mental doesn't mean crazy. Sometimes it's a disconnect of thinking, as we've seen with Putin. It's another way of disconnect of thinking, as we saw with Will Smith. But they're not here today. I know that if they were, they could get the help that could lead them to the next thing that would benefit them. In our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our families, is someone that will benefit from the information you're going to get here today. And I look forward to this being an annual event. I believe that if we tap into this missed opportunity for so many years and begin to really put emphasis on our mental state of mind, mine as well, our mental state of mind when different things come about. How do we manage conflict? We saw our children in school this year have such the challenge when school was going from virtual back to in live schooling and then back to virtual and then shut back down again. It affected them in such a negative way. That's a part of their mental state of mind. Not being told the truth about COVID is another thing that affected all of us. We had people in high places that pretended to have the information that was going to make things better for us, and they really didn't know. They should have just told us, we really don't know, it's new, let's work on this together. And I believe that would have been a better thing to do than to appear to have the answer for something so great. So I look forward to meeting, as I've met with most of you today. I look forward to continuing to do the work I've done in this city for so long. We have Gotta Go Now and Mount Pisgah Justice that joined together to bring this first citywide mental health summit that I look forward to being an annual event. So thank you very much for coming. And we have Dr. Holness.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Just come and pray. But I need to issue this disclaimer this morning. I've come to pray as the pastor of Adams Inspirational African Methodist Episcopal Church. In this capacity, I'm not representing the District of Columbia. That's my disclaimer. I need a job. Tell the truth and shame the devil. It's good to see many of you this morning. I know a lot of you out there, but let us pray. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Eternal God, our Father, we are grateful for this Saturday, on this second day of April in 2022 that you have given us graciously. We thank you for dispatching your angels to our bedsides to breathe the breath of life in us, so that we might put one foot out of the bed and then the other and take care of ourselves. God, we are grateful that most of us who are sitting in this place today could feed ourselves, could put our own clothes on, could bring ourselves to this mental health summit. We thank you for that. And God, unashamedly, I thank you for Jesus, and I thank you for this Holy Spirit that covers us. We thank you for giving us the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to care for those in our midst, because we know that we need a healing not only mentally but physically as well. And so we rest our concerns at your feet. You said, make your requests be made known. We're dealing with a pandemic that has exponentially impacted all of us. We may not have come over on the same boat, God, but we're in the same boat now. And so we have some of the same concerns and some of the same issues, and we ask for healing for our people, not only in Washington, D.C., but in our nation, not only in our nation, but globally. We pray for those who organized this summit today, that you might continue to give them the courage to go forward in spite of all of the hurdles, in spite of the potholes that they may encounter, but they might run on to see what the end will be. Bless those who came out this morning, that you've given the strength to get up. Bless our government. Bless the mayor of the city. Bless our law enforcement, our executive, legislative, and judicial body of this area. We pray for those in Ukraine, and we pray for those in Russia, but we pray for those right here where we are, because we still have issues and concerns, God, and you know what they are. And so we ask that you take care of them. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We're just going to trust you. For I've come in the matchless, the marvelous, and wonderful name of Jesus Christ our Savior. And all of God's children say, amen. Put your hands together and give God a hand clap of praise. He's worthy. It's all right. Okay, now, we have to face it. I think that was such a profound statement this morning. We have to face it to fix it. We really do. And faith and mental wellness intersects, as I said previously. I'm reminded of scripture in the book of Matthew, whether or not we believe it, but according to scripture that I've read in the New Testament of Matthew, Jesus had some supernatural powers. And he exorcised demons out of people. Demons, as we know them, as just regular human beings, or those things that cause us to have bad behavior, experience different encounters in our life, just inappropriate. Physical illnesses can also cause mental illness. And whether or not we want to actually realize that, it happens as a result of something that we talk about, but we talk about it in terms of veterans. Glenda, PTSD. We think that only those who've been to Vietnam, Afghanistan, Ukraine, or other wars are the ones who suffer from PTSD. I would submit that most of us in this room have experienced some kind of trauma in our lives. PTSD is caused by traumatic events, war. Remember those kids that were sitting on the wall in Southeast that got killed? I'm sure some of those parents and other children that saw those events experienced some PTSD, post-traumatic. I'm sure there are those who have experienced death and sickness, know how traumatic that is. But there's some myths about mental illness that I want to just share very briefly with you. Remember, I'm looking around and most of y'all I'm not ashamed to tell it, because if I start flashing, y'all gonna know about how old I am. I'm 65, I ain't ashamed, and I'm flashing and patting. But I remember somebody named Flip Wilson. How many of y'all remember Flip Wilson? See, I knew I'm not the only one up in here. And when Flip Wilson did something, that was inappropriate, he would always say what? Okay, y'all old too. The devil made me do it. Well, I'm the youngest of 10 children. And my parents were did not commit corporal punishment, but they did not spare the rod, but they spoiled the children anyhow, because we knew what to do. And if we told them that the devil made us do it, what would normally be their response? Come on now, look. And that's not corporal punishment, that's just a verbal confrontation, as my mother would call it. And so that's a myth though, because mental illness can also be something that is caused by a disorder in your brain. And everybody with mental illness doesn't belong at St. Elizabeth's. They don't belong in hospitals, just like everybody that finished high school are necessarily college material. Same thing with people with mental illness. People with mental illness, there is help and there is healing that is available. And while the Bible says if there's any sick amongst you, to call for the elders of the church to pray for them, to anoint them with oil, and the faith of others can heal them. This is a faith conference. And what is faith? Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. We have seen people that were sick that were healed. You're looking at one. 10 years ago, I had a major stroke. Was in Howard's hospital for 45 days. They said I would never walk again. They said I would never talk again. Michael Jackson don't have nothing on me. And you see I'm talking, Reverend Motley's walking around having suffered a stroke. Those kinds of illnesses can cause mental breakdowns because you're laying in the bed for 45 days, and most of you in here know me. I'm in many places at many times. So I got a lot of energy, so I'm out there, and so you can't stop living because of a mental illness. We've got to take care of our own. We've got to ask them what the issues are. We've got to help them go to the doctor. It's like taking them to a party. You can't take somebody to a party and don't dance with them. If you take them to the doctors, you got to stay there and you got to check on them. Just like we check on what we call our seniors in our churches. Somebody calls to check on them when it's really cold. Somebody calls to check on them when it's hot outside and they know they don't have air conditioning. The same thing we've got to do with people that we know have mental illnesses. You know, when you're sick, you tell somebody, oh, I don't feel well. And they just say, oh, you probably need to go home and take care of yourself. And if you tell them you got something else going on, that you got a little mental thing going on, they'll say, oh, everybody going through that. Everybody does not go through what you go through. And whether or not they think your problem is a major problem, if you think it's a major problem, or if that individual thinks it's a major problem, it's major to them. And so we need to help each other. Jeffrey Osborne had a song say, if my brother is in trouble, so am I. We create a better world when we help each other. And so we've got to be able to help each other. There's causes of mental illness are brain chemistry, genetic disposition, trauma. Your environment can cause mental illness. You live around more rats than the people in your house. You got more trash in your neighborhood than there is at the dump. People throwing stuff in your community. I was taught as a little girl, you don't mess up your own community. You don't throw trash in your own community, even though on the flip side of that, somebody would tell you to throw the trash out so you could give a brother a job. But they don't need that kind of job. We need to take care of our own. And the effects of physical health causes mental health, as I said. But look at this. The common mental illnesses. You don't have to raise your hand if you're a part of this. Anxiety. When you're anxious and can't sleep, something's happening. And I'm sure the people that organized this event today were anxious about it and thinking about it. Trauma and stressor-related disorders. I want y'all to know that alopecia is caused basically by stress. Unlike autism that somebody else has. Bipolar and depressive disorders. You know how we'll walk around and say, oh, they just bipolar. Do you know what bipolar is? Schizophrenia. Do you really know what schizophrenia is? Suicide is a major issue in our society. If you watch the news and see the people that are committing suicide, who ever would have thought in this room that Don Cornelius, so trained, would have committed suicide? See, to us, he had everything in the world. Robin Williams, the funny man. I love Mork and Mindy besides all the other stuff he did after Mork and Mindy. That just took all of us back, Mork and Mindy. Phyllis Hyman. Who would have thought about Phyllis Hyman? That great voice that she had. What about Amy Winehouse, who sang, "Want to go to rehab?" And she said, "No, no, no." Maybe she should have said yes, yes, yes. We need to recognize when we need help, or recognize others when they need help, so that we can help them. Mental illness is not caused by sin or by demons. Yes, demons are real, they exist, and we know some folk that are full of demons. Because when Jesus exorcised those demons out of those two men up on that mountaintop, it said they went into herds of cattle. And that's just two people with all those demons. You walk up to somebody and you just know they demon filled. They're never happy. It's always something wrong. You ever call somebody that you learn how to not say how you doing? I had an aunt that I used to call, and every time I called her, I said, "How you feel?" "Oh, well," she had every condition in the world. I learned when I called her to just ask, "Hey, can I speak to you?" You know, I left that part off because I knew I was going to get a dissertation. And so it's not. They exist. We can't just try harder. Our trying harder is to get help. There is help. There is hope. Hope and healing exist. And all we have to do is take advantage of those opportunities. Well, look at this, some more facts. Half of all lifetime cases of mental illness begins by age. What'd you say? Can I get an age where you think mental illness starts? 25, 12, 2, 0. Well, according to the statistics that we have, everybody's right, but 14. And I think they're dropping that age to 12. And in a minute, they're going to drop it to probably 0. They're going to come here with it. Because some children may be born, if they're born with addicted to drugs, they have other illnesses, that can cause mental illnesses as well. But what we need to stop doing is telling our children when they have inappropriate or bad behavior, Roscoe, we need to discipline them. And not say, "Oh, that's so cute." Well, if it's cute when they're 2 and 3 and 4, it's not going to be cute when they're 14 and 15 and 16. We need to stop providing the opportunities because we're trying to spoil our children. You can, my mother and father spoiled 10 children, sent all 10 of us to college. And it wasn't because they were rich. It was because they had discipline in the house. And you don't have to have corporal punishment and beat your children like some parents did, but they can go dig my mother up right now and my father. But you've got to take care. But half of all of lifetime cases of mental illness begins at age 14, and it's usually years, sometimes decades, before a person will seek and receive help. 25, 30, 35, 40. Less than 40% of people with mental illness receives help. Less than 40%, so at least 60%, over half of our community that have issues involving mental illness or not receiving the help. That's why we have opportunities through different entities. The Department of Behavioral Health, which was formerly the Department of Mental Health. There's a 24-hour service through DBH, which is what it's called today. But trauma-related disorders are violence. Violence in our community, violence in our families. We see when people react even in major platforms, there's some kind of mental disorder going on right there. And something triggers those disorders. An old experience. I was reading this morning prior to coming here about how the psychologists and psychiatrists had gotten together talking about different people having outbursts. And it's triggered by perhaps something that happened in their childhood. I don't know about you, but I don't eat meat anymore, but I had an aunt, well, my mother, let me just tell the truth. My grandfather was a pastor, and we entertained pastors at our house for Sunday dinner. Y'all remember the Sunday dinners? And the children had to sit at another table. And they got all the breast and the good meat. We got a leg, perhaps a thigh, but even the boys got the thighs. You know, that could have caused, we were just sitting there waiting, wondering why we couldn't be there. As a child, we don't know what triggers you. You know, what triggers you is the aunt who wouldn't give you that extra piece of cake at the family reunion, and then you saw her taking half the cake home. And when you see somebody like that, these are just real life examples that impact our lives, that has an emotional impact on us. Feeling irritable is an anxiety, when you're just irritated by everything. You know, we get burned out because there are those of us who are so active in the community police officer, we there on call 24/7. And we know that something might be happening. You know, can you imagine the stress and trauma that those in law enforcement go through? My father was in law enforcement. My brothers were all military officers. Can you imagine the stress and trauma they go through? The stress and trauma that pastors go through, that deacons in the church, the stewards in the church, and just members of churches go through, just listening to what other people have gone through, going to funerals, going to people's sick beds, hearing their issues and concerns about their children, their sons and their daughters that are not doing well. That causes some kind of mental disease. If your children are not doing what they need to be doing, and you know that you put everything, you've just invested everything in them, and they turn out another way, that causes some kind of disease. I don't know about you. I had one egg in one basket. I had one chance at it. But you do what you do out of respect and honor. These things cause all kind of other illnesses, like depression. Depression, sometimes you don't feel like getting out of bed, you're just tired. I don't feel like doing this no more. I'm worse than Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm sicker and sicker and tireder than being sicker and sicker and tireder. She was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I just want to let you know I know what the real thing is. But these impact our lives so much. People who have schizophrenia have delusions. They have hallucinations. They have disorganized thinking and grossly disorganized and abnormal motor behavior. You see them sometimes, they look like they're catatonic, delusional. This is delusional. This is me telling everybody, you know, this is delusional. Don't take me serious. So people with delusions, you cannot feed into it. If I went out and started saying, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car, you know that's delusional. I need a new car. So how am I going to give you a car? But you can look at me and tell I don't have that kind of money. So but you can't feed into those delusions. And if they say that, you hear people, or you see them on the street talking to someone, and they don't have any AirPods, nor do they have a string coming out of their ear, you know that they're having an out-of-body experience. They're having a conversation. You can't negate that, but don't have a conversation with that person with them. Don't feed into their delusions. And of course, the disorganized thinking, if they are going through some situations, they not organizing their thinking. The major depression. And don't raise your hand, because I know most of us have been through some of this. This is what you're happening. Loss our interest in the things in life that you had interest in before. You withdraw socially. People used to see you at all the parties. And then all of a sudden you withdraw. Something's happening. Why isn't she here? Your appetite changes. You eat too much or you eat less. There's significant weight loss or weight gain. Your energy level goes down. You're fatigued, you're tired. You get tired all the time. You have a sense of worthlessness, and you become one of those people, the oh, why me's. Why is this happening to me? Why can't I have the big house and the big car? Why can't I have the job that's paying me $500,000 a year? Why me? You see what everybody else is doing. Do you? And that's what we need to teach. And all of this starts, while it starts at a young age, I'm going to put a pin in it right there. There's something that says train up a child in the way that they should go. We can't wait to train them when they get older. We send our dogs and our cats to school. We train our dogs and our cats and all of our animals, but we do not train our children. And they do not come here with instructions. And somebody has got to take care of them, and that's us. Not only is there impaired ability to think and concentrate on and make decisions, they make inappropriate decisions as a result of your depressive state. You lash out at people, you slap people. You're distracted, memory difficulties. I'm not talking about those of us who go downstairs and forget what we went downstairs for. You know, that's a common memory difficulty, is when you go back upstairs and figure out what you went downstairs for, is when you know you're all right. Oh, that's right, I put it over there. And then there's suicidal thoughts. When people have suicidal thoughts, generally they begin to express it or show signs of it. You need to be there for them. Ask them if they're really thinking about it. And if they're really thinking about them, ask them how they're going to do it. Do you have a gun? Do you have a knife? You're going to jump off the building? How are you going to kill yourself? And if they're at that point of suicide, then they have disoriented thinking. And so that's why they need somebody to help them together. You know, generally in our families, when people, and we're dealing with this pandemic of opioids. You know, people used to smoke weed. Now they putting fentanyl and everything else in the weed. The other day I was walking down the street. I walk 2 to 3 miles every day, and I was walking down the street. I live in Ward 1. And I just saw some people doing like this, because I feed them generally daily. And I asked them, because I see them selling the crack. I see them selling all the drugs. I feed them anyway, because, what you gonna do? And I said, is there a new drug on the street? They said, yeah, they lacing everything with fentanyl. This is a major pandemic in our community. And drugs and alcohol can cause mental illnesses. Bad behavior, you had that Uncle Gus that most of us had that came to family reunions and got drunk and fought somebody, and then, the family fed him and he went to sleep and woke up and started all over again. There's something wrong with Uncle Gus. But the family never turned their back on the Uncle Gus's in our families. We took them in. We didn't have homeless family members. They slept on the couch. We fed them and tried to help them get on their feet. Now we throw them out. I remember the drunks as a little kid. They'd walk across the street from the church, but now they're at the beautiful gate of the church waiting for alms for us to give them. Somehow this respect has been lost. And as members, and this is a faith summit, right? Is this a faith summit? Somehow we've got to put our faith to work. Somehow we've got to capitalize what we know in our spirits to do. It's spiritual. We've got to be able to pull it out. We've got to be able to help our fellow persons, our brothers, our sisters. All of this violence in our community is outrageous. That's causing mental diseases. Some of us don't want to ride around after dark, afraid of what might happen to us, but you don't have to ride around after dark. It'll happen in broad daylight. And so just the condition of our nation, the condition of our city is causing us problems. We got to stay strong. We've got to stay together. We've got to get the help for our people that need help and stop turning our backs on them and go with them to get the help. We need to call those numbers. 1-887 we help. That's a number you can call. But we've got to begin to do a couple of things. We got to effectively listen to them. We've got to be there for them. We don't have to respond to everything they say. Sometimes folk just need to vent, to get it out. And that's called effective listening. We've got to be empathetic listeners where they know that we hear them and we see them. And most folk think that if you don't see them, they don't exist. Everybody wants to have a self-worth. We can't take that away from them. We've got to listen to what they've got to say. We've got to let them sit where they need to sit. We've got to let them say what they need to say without being judgmental. Because I read somewhere, and Tupac Shakur said it, that only God can judge me. We are not the judge of what we don't know what somebody else is going through unless you have been in their shoes. You worrying about your feet hurting, and then you run into a person that has no feet. So the main thing we need to do with each other is to help each other and to take care of ourselves. And on this last part, self-care is not selfish. So many of us have been so concerned with taking care of everybody else, the pastor giving counseling, because, you know, as a pastor myself for over 25 years, you know, people call you and tell Pastor, I got a headache. 2 o'clock in the morning. And I have to remind them that there's just a D-Min and a JD behind my name, not a MD. Call your doctor, I'll call 911. But you're going to you learn to be empathetic and listen to them, because people just want to be heard. They don't need a response every time. But you've got to take care of yourself, because when you get on an airplane, how many of you been on an airplane? And what do they tell you before they take off? If something happens, put the what? Put the mask on yourself first and then help somebody else. I mean, we can sing that song in church all the time. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living will not be in vain. But if you don't take care of yourself, you cannot take care of anybody else. Both of y'all be sitting there with an issue. You got to create boundaries for yourself in environments. You can't hang out with the people you work with all the time. You can't hang out with the people that you go to church with all the time. You can't hang out with your psychologist or your psychiatrist. You can't hang out with the same people every time, because people begin to step across the line. Y'all know what step across the line is. You have to tell them to fall back. You have to set boundaries. You need to take vacations. Go somewhere. Even if it's a staycation, cut that phone off. Turn that news off. Stop looking at so much MSNBC, CNN, CBS, ABC, Get Up, DC. Good Morning America. Stop doing that. Set boundaries for yourself. Give yourself an opportunity to pay attention to you. What's going on with you? And I'll tell you how important that is, because on Wednesday, I honored the first year transition of my mother. And emotionally for me, I had to not withdraw, but step back. Because I wouldn't have been no good to anybody else. You coming with the cane? Oh, okay. You know, I know you did. I know they'll pull you off stage. Just give me the sign when it's time. Yeah, that's a good sign. But you've got to set boundaries for yourself. You've got to pay attention to exercise and your diet. I walk 2 to 3 miles and sometimes even more every day. You know why? Not to lose weight, and it does help to maintain, but I do it for my mental health. Wednesday, I was out walking. I usually do 2 to 3. I did 6 because I had a lot of stress on me. I'm the baby of 10. I preached my mother's funeral. Emotion, you got to give yourself time to bereave those people in your family and friends who have passed as a result of this pandemic called coronavirus, and I'm not talking about Corona beer. People are still dying from cancer. People are still dying from AIDS and lupus and high blood. People are dying from other illnesses before there was something that we knew of called coronavirus 2 years ago. So you got to set boundaries. You got to get regular checkups. You need to go to the doctor. Stop waiting until you feel sick. Go check on yourself. You take other people to the doctor, check on you. Sometimes it's too late. That's why they insist that people have the prostate. Go get your prostate checked. Go get your mammograms. You know, things we go get, but you got to go get them. Because you've got to take care of yourself. You have to get proper sleep. Insomnia is invoked in all of those things I talked about earlier. Schizophrenia and everything else. Insomnia is real. You have to go to sleep. You have to get rest. Because if you don't get the rest, you become irritable. You start telling people off. Saying stuff you really wanted to say anyway. And then you just get so tired, you just say it. You got to set aside that personal time just for you. Get away from those children, those grandchildren, those people on your job, those people at church, people in your community. Get away. Even, as I said, if it's just staying in your room for not too long. But you got to recognize the indicators. You have to recognize when something is changing in your life. You know, when we get older, things change. You know, I used to run. I told you I'm walking now. That's an indicator for me. I knew. I was like, okay, I got this. You don't have to tell me what one time. But there's a song by Kendrick Lamar that says, I love myself. And then there's also a scripture that says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your soul. But love your neighbor as yourself. I submit to you that you can't love anyone else unless you love yourself. And that's not selfish. If you don't take care of yourself, who's going to take care of you? You get up in the morning and you walk out the house and you think you're looking all right, and then, you know, you feeling good, and then you run up into somebody and they tell you, you look like you're going through some changes. You look unhappy. You don't look too good. I don't like that dress you got on. Well, you know, number one, you need to tell yourself, okay, fall back, but you don't have to respond. Number one, you didn't put that dress on for anybody but yourself, or that suit that you got on. You know how you're feeling on the inside, so whatever happens from the outside, because the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy your spirit, and you can't let that happen. You have something called self-control and free will. The devil can't make you do anything that you didn't want to do anyway. It's like they say drunk people, when they're drunk, they say what they wanted to say before they got drunk. So it was there all the time. It was just something that triggered them. They got drunk. And they started telling all the family business. And all of their business. So there's a change in the attitude as a result of other stimulants like drugs and alcohol that come into our lives. And we can't get it unless it's accessible. So it has to be something that is accessible. But we have to know how, when we deal with people, as you take care of yourself, you got to realize that you're not a mental health specialist, number one, unless you've been to school. You're a social worker. You got the degrees. You're a psychologist, a psychiatrist. You got the training from wherever you are. You are not an expert. And so what do you need to do? You need to make referrals to the appropriate individuals that have the appropriate skills to take care of their particular issue. And we are like our fingerprints. We all have something different. It's a case-by-case analysis. Everybody that doesn't respond the same way, just like we don't all respond to the medication. You know, you hear those medications on TV, and they tell you all these things, and the side effects are, you're going to go be crippled, blind, you're not going to make it to 65. You know, there's all kind of stuff with this medication, but we still take it. It's like people not taking this vaccine, talking about, I don't know what's in it. You didn't know what was in that booster shot when you had to get it, go to school in the first grade. How many scientists out there talking about, I need to wait to see what's going to happen? 900,000 people have died. What else do you need to wait for? What other sign do you need? This is real. This pandemic is real. And what it is taking care of yourself and taking care of others. You can't be concerned about that. They can't legislate life for you. Life cannot be legislated. Love cannot be legislated. The care for someone else and your spirituality cannot be legislated. That's something on the inside. And what you've got on the inside generally is trying to work its way to the outside. And so you need to know how to make referrals to make sure that people get the help and the assistance that they need, because it creates a better environment when there's no crime. It creates a better environment when our people are employed. Because when they're employed, and that's a major thing, officers, because if they're employed, they can get health care, they can get housing, they can buy food, regardless of whether or not they live in the food desert. They can go somewhere else to get the food. If the food don't come to them, you go to the food. But my mother never shopped in our neighborhoods anyway, because she knew. I'm just telling you what it is. It is what it is, and we've got to deal with where we are. And we can't sugarcoat it. And we can't make inappropriate behavior glamorous. Wrong is wrong is wrong. And two wrongs, I know your mother said it, what is it? Two wrongs don't what? Two wrongs don't make it right. And I remember my grandfather was a pastor, and I remember them praying, and I'm going to end with this. My grandmother and grandfather would pray, and they'd say, thank you, Lord, for waking me up in my right mind. How many of y'all heard that? Well, if they want to wake up in their left mind, in their right mind, somebody's waking up in their left mind. And so we've got to take care of each other. We've got to make sure that we know that the help is there, and it is. And DBH, amongst other providers in this city, there's many other providers in this city that not only helps those adults, but there are several providers that out there, and DBHs as well, to help our young people. It's serious. I worked at St. Elizabeth's as a patient rights advocate back in the 80s, and I thought that they had stopped doing the treatment, the shock treatment, because they weren't supposed to be doing it. I saw a shock treatment of a 6-year-old, and I was done. 6-year-old black boy. I called my mother. She said all they needed to let him do was go outside and play. I submit to you today, you need to go outside and play. God bless you.
To God be the glory. Come on, let's give God a hand praise this morning. To God be the glory. I'm not going to get up here and do a sermon this morning. I've been asked to present on behalf of the African American community, mental health, and the church. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Brother Fred Hill. Brother Fred Hill, will you wave your hand back there if you would? Let's give him a hand praise if you would for all the wonderful work he does in our community. Attorney Donetta Edwards, also give her a hand praise for putting on this very, very important forum that we need to really give serious attention to. I want to recognize a clergy that's here this morning. I heard Reverend Motley was here. Give him a hand praise. I'm going to ask y'all to do that. It's a pattern going on here. Our police force representation here this morning. Our military this morning, who's here this morning. So we are well represented here this morning. And let's give one more hand praise to the wonderful presentation that we just heard this morning. Face it to fix it. That was profound. Actually, I think that every time I'm around this woman, she always has a little sermonette in her somewhere that she brings out. So I would submit also that could possibly be the theme of this particular forum or workshop this morning, the Panoramic View of Mental Wellness Summit. And my name is Reverend Alan Tillman, and I'm honored to be here this morning. I've been a mental health professional for now some 25 years here in the district, the DMV. And so I've been in ministry almost 30 years now. And from day one, I was approached, or people were referred to me who may have been thought to have mental issues in the church, and that our church was afraid to confront them. So me being a new minister, they sent them to me. Being gullible and naive, and and no, I was elated to have an opportunity to work with individuals who have had issues with mental wellness. But as I said, I'm going to compartmentalize my presentation this morning about African Americans in the church and the faith community. The social economic impact of slavery, sharecropping, and Jim Crowism. The social economic status is linked to mental health in people who are impoverished and homeless and incarcerated. They are at a higher risk to have mental health challenges. And I'm going to say, and being in this industry for over 25 years, everyone in this room has or has had a mental health issue. Everybody. La-di-da-di, as somebody said earlier. But a lot of times we try to cover it up. The Spirit gave to me this morning is that the church is where we camouflage mental wellness. Because if you go into church acting in some unusual manner, the first thing somebody's going to say is, but the Holy Ghost got him. And oftentimes that's true. But there are times when a person may be just going through a situation, and the best way to express that is through some gyration or some exhilarated actions in the church, because guess what? We're going to accept it. And we're going to say that was the Holy Spirit. Because for one thing, we don't want to recognize that the person may have a mental health issue. Because a lot of times in the church, there's nowhere to send them. You know where to go for your tithes and offering. You know where to go to a variety of things in a church. But at the end of the service, where do you send somebody who has obviously demonstrated that they have an issue or a condition or a concern? So I want to just recommend a few things. I'm not going to belabor the point this morning. I'm going to say that a few things we need to do in the church. Number one, we have to educate church leaders to make sure they understand mental health conditions are just as real as physical conditions. When you are going through something emotionally, it may hurt just as much as a physical condition. And we need our church leaders, and I'm going to put it on a little bit on pastors here, because I have been brushed off by pastors to send them to Reverend Tillman. Go send them over there to Reverend Tillman. He'll talk to them. Because there's not a vehicle that we can use to help address that situation. Friedrich Nietzsche said that religion was the opium for people. It's where people went that had challenges, that a motivating sermon or some wonderful singing and a spirit that overwhelms you in the church would camouflage what a person was going through. And I've seen people in tears, and I know they weren't tears of joy, but we said they were tears of joy because guess what? We didn't know how to deal with it. So in this day and age, we've got to find and create ways and create situations. We've got to encourage the church to have a mental wellness first aid training in the church. It's okay to come up here and do this. You know, we're all back here. Nobody can see what we're doing. But it needs to be done in the church, where every church member can learn how to deal. I want to ask you right now, if someone was in your church and they exhibited some behavior that was a bit bizarre, irrational, what would you do? Pardon me? Oh boy. Yes. Beautiful. Okay, let me just kind of tweak that a little bit. What if they're having an episode during the service? What do you do? Somebody raise their hand. Tell me what would you do? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. LOVE. Okay? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Right.
Even though the police officers in here.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. And let's give him a hand praise, if you would. Because, and the reason I say that, a lot of y'all not going to be transparent. You're faking the funk. We dressed up. We got on suits. We got on uniforms. We don't want anybody to know what we're really going through, what's really happening in our lives, and how we're barely getting by, because it's easy to dress it up and cover it up, and particularly in your industry, sir. You know, and that's a delicate situation where you're at the expense of the community and taking a lot of abuse, and it has a wear and tear on us, even as parents. Taking the abuse from your children, taking the abuse from your husband or wife or significant other. There are a lot of people who run the church to get away from home because they don't want to deal with what's going on at home. So coming into the church environment is a place of safety, a haven, if you will, a safe place to be. But as a faith community, we have got to become more proactive and prepare for mental health challenges, because they're all in our church and they're all within the church community, and individuals all among us are struggling. And we can no longer be ashamed of the fact that if we have an issue, it's just as detrimental as a physical injury. You know, we got to start giving that its proper respect. I told you I wouldn't be before you very long, but I just want to, if you know, your church is a rarity. I'm sure that most churches don't have something where they can direct their constituents or their members, congregants. They can direct them to see someone to help them. And like the young lady said, a lot of times when people are sent to me, and I have church members in here who are part of my family, and people have been sent to me. And the first thing I do is what you do. I try to show them some love first. I am a professional. I've been a professional for 25 years, but I don't practice that in the church. But I can practice love. And that's what we have to do. That's the first step into helping someone who has an issue, is to show them a little bit of love and to show them a little bit of kindness and not be judgmental of an individual who is struggling with an issue. Because if you've ever, I've suffered from depression. Now, being a mental health professional and then having my own condition is quite a conundrum of sorts. But it makes me a better professional when I've been through what somebody's going through. It makes me a better preacher. When I can minister, when I can just not get up and give a sermon, but I can actually minister to someone based on the challenges that they're experiencing. I'm a native Washingtonian. I'm the oldest of 8 children. And despite the girth that I have now, I was always a skinny little kid. I went to Moulton here, across the street. Sir, I got beat up more times than I can. Because I was tall, you know, and the thing was to say, you know what, even though I was skinny, say, you know, I beat up this guy that was 6 feet tall. Didn't mention that he weighed 120 pounds. So you know, I had my share of physical abuse. And at that time, it was not recognized in our schools. Because along with the church, we also have to recognize it in our schools too. You know, our kids are going through, you know, this, I often tell my grandkids, I don't know if I could exist during this time. Social media and all the things that you guys go through, I don't know. And the social media is also in the church. Because you get on somebody's nerve, you'll be on Facebook in a heartbeat. People don't mind putting your business out there no more. And a lot of people put their own business out there. You know, but it can be very harmful. And I'm just saying that thank God for this forum. Thank you all for this forum, because we really need to embrace mental wellness. Like I said, I've been doing this most of my adult life, professional life, and there's still a need, a great need for professional attention. And finally, there are several biblical analogies that come to mind. You know, when we look at it and say that, you know, if your faith is strong, you shouldn't have an issue. But Jesus wept. You know, when he lost his best friend, he lost it. Elijah lost it. You know, there are several instances. Gideon went in the cave and hid in the cave because he was depressed. So there are situations biblically that show us that, yeah, this is a real thing. And as a faith community, we've got to galvanize. You know, one thing that I don't care for about church is that we're very individualized. And with this particular issue, we have got to come together and put our resources together. And not say it's only going to be our church. But let's bring other churches together. Let's network and let's get other churches. If you can't provide a service, maybe another church can provide that service. Let's come together as a community and work together so that we can help the individuals who are challenged with mental wellness and recruit trained professionals on our church staff. We don't want to pay nobody to begin with. We ain't trying to pay nobody. But I think it's incumbent of us to start to entertain looking at staffing individuals who are professionals who can deal with mental wellness. So at this time, if there are any questions, I would definitely take your questions at this time. If you have any questions? Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Sure. And was that John? Yes. Alpha Street. Yeah, I remember that. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yes. Yep. I remember that. And that inspired me so much. Because think how different our churches would be if the head of the church admitted he had an issue. Because your greatest witness is what God brought you through. When you tell somebody what God has delivered you from, you'd be surprised how many people would say, you know what, I had that same problem. I just didn't know who to tell. I just didn't want anybody to let me know because I'm on the deacon board. I just came from K&G. I got a brand new suit and matching handkerchief. You know what I'm saying? So I looked the part. So I can't let anybody know that I got issues. And so, yeah, that was excellent what he did. Yes. Yes. Oh, okay. Slavery, is it not endorsed in the Bible, which comes from a lot of obey your master? No, sir. Solution to that. Should we be supporting political issues, for example, the reparation issue? Absolutely. Yeah. You know, because because when we talk about the drug abuse, and there is something new aside the fentanyl. There's a new drug that's on the scene now that's even going to enhance it even more. But yeah, absolutely. You know, we need to addressing those issues would take some of that pressure, perhaps. I know what it is to be broke. I know that feeling, and I don't care what nobody tell you, it don't feel good. And it can cause some other issues to come out, desperation, and you know, you wonder why somebody would rob somebody or do some of the behaviors that are not, you know, kosher. Is a lot of times because of the Jim Crow and the slavery and those things, because we're not privileged people, and that can have you know, she said her whole family went to college. A lot of people can't say that, you know, because they can't afford to do that. You know what I'm saying? Based on the social economic challenges that came from the things in the past. I didn't want to belabor that point, so I didn't want to go too hard on it. I wanted to be cautious of my audience, mindful of my audience. But yeah, you know, I'm a product of that. I'm a project boy. I was born in Valley Green, moved to Bird Farms. I moved up to Bird Farms, right? So I know what it is to walk through your neighborhood and not know whether or not you're going to make it in. You know what I mean? I know what it is. My mother, thank God for my mother, because she can take flour and some chicken thighs and make a meal like a Golden Corral. You know what I'm saying? But we didn't have those type of things. I wore my brother's pants to school. I went to Hart Junior High. I wore a pair of khakis for an entire year. Can you imagine the ridicule that I went through wearing that one pair of khakis? But, you know, these type of things can have emotional. She talked about the trauma. That traumatize you. And sometimes you exhibit behavior that is not indicative of the individual that you truly are. You had your hand up, right? Oh, yeah, okay.
I would say that I'm here as someone who's speaking in terms of mental health issues. But that said, so I guess my pressing question right now is just like what is the year-to-year goal of this body? I know this is like the first time meeting. I mean, but can you state like what's your goal of these meetings that you're having today are?
Well, I'll yield to Attorney Edwards on that because they have put this forum together, and so she could best answer that question for you. Thank you all so much for your time.
Dr. Gordon is
want to save time for the other people. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about myself because that's not what's important and that's not why we're here. But I want you to know I grew up in New York City in the Bronx. I grew up in a large family. My parents decided because they were doing well, as integration came in, my dad was able to get a better job. They were able to move up from what was called the South Bronx into the North Bronx, which was a nicer neighborhood, and I benefited tremendously from that, going to better schools and so forth. And my parents opened up their home to foster children. So I grew up in a home with 3 of my own siblings and 8 other foster children. And it was a very powerful experience because those children came from very difficult homes. Some came from abusive and violent homes. And so I learned from my parents that I was very fortunate. And my mother used to say all the time, when you are blessed, you give back, and you give back to others. And that's how you help people who are hurting and in trouble and who have less than yourself. And you help them to come where you are. So I grew up with that. I decided to become a physician. I went to medical school in Philadelphia, and then I decided to become a psychiatrist. And why did I decide to become a psychiatrist? Because I so enjoyed hearing people's stories, whether they were positive, whether they were negative. But all of us learn and grow from positive and negative experiences, right? Negative experiences teach us things. Positive experiences teach us things. So I went into the field of psychiatry. I went initially and worked in the prison system in Philadelphia. And if you can imagine little me 35 years ago, I've been a psychiatrist for a long time. I'm not going to tell you how long. And it, not only the inmates, but the correction officers tried to eat me up and chew me alive. And I said, okay, if you guys are not going to let me be positive in this environment, I'm leaving. So then I went to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I had a very positive and wonderful experience working with combat veterans for many years. And they taught me so much about healing and survival and coming back to a country that wasn't always positive toward them. This was primarily Vietnam veterans, and still loving their country and wanting to work and have families and give back to this country. So I always, whenever I speak, I always give credit to the veterans that I worked with in teaching me a lot about healing and wholeness and survival, and making me a better physician and a better psychiatrist. And then I began to work with the Department of Justice, and I've been working with assisting in building resiliency programs for law enforcement officers. So that's my experience. I have started something called the Foundation for Healing, and it hasn't really gone anywhere because I don't really know how to move these concerns forward. And so I just met Ms. Danetta Edwards, and she invited me to this summit, and I said, this is an answer to prayer, because I know there are other people like myself that are concerned about what's going on, concerned about our veterans, concerned about our law enforcement community, concerned about our youth. And I'm actually talking my presentation without going through it. There are so many people at risk and that are experiencing different forms and different types of mental health concerns. We're not doing a good job of making sure that those healing resources are available to whoever needs them. And that has been an issue for me in the over 20 years that I have been a psychiatrist. Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard for the United States of America to have proper health care for its citizens? Why is that? I have an issue with the health care system being for profit. Because what happens when things are for profit? You get all tied up in the money and you forget the people. Not only do you forget the patients, thank you. Not only do you forget the patients and the clients, you forget the personnel. The doctors and the nurses and the social workers and the janitors and the people that cook the food and everybody that makes the system run. If you don't hire sufficient staff, and if you don't support them when they're doing the difficult work, and with this big COVID nightmare, imagine how exhausted and overwhelmed, and if any healthcare people are here, you know how overwhelming this has been. How can you take care of a fellow human being, like the Reverend said, if you yourself are exhausted and tired and can barely get to the next situation that you need to get to? So we need some sort of revolution in the healthcare system, because the first thing that goes, in my humble opinion, this is my opinion, don't blame this on anybody else. The first thing that goes when you're trying to save money or you're trying to make a profit is the mental health care. That's the first that goes. Okay, because you have to keep doing the surgery and you have to take care of people who have diabetes and heart disease. You have to, there's ethical and moral principles about that. But you can very slowly let the depressed person or the person who has schizophrenia or the person who has bipolar disorder or the person who has post-traumatic stress just kind of suffer and fall away to the wayside. Do you all agree with what I'm saying, or do you think I'm off base in some way? I have to be careful because I think I'm discovering that I'm a rabble rouser. I just don't know where to take it yet. But I'm here to say that I, along with Miss Edwards, we need help with this. We need help in making a change. And I don't quite know how to do it, but I am prepared to work less hours on my job and spend more hours making a difference. So I prepared this PowerPoint. It's too long. There's some key things that I want to say. I don't know if you can see it from back here, but let me just go through a couple of the slides, and this young lady here is going to help me not to go too far past 30 minutes. I believe that there is a mental health. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Collins. Here, let's get you a chair. Okay, thank you. So, I believe that there is a mental health crisis in the country right now, but I believe that it's kind of masked because there's all these other crises going on. You know, we've got, I've got a slide here that just lists, there's so many toxic things that are going on. And now, of course, we got to add to that the fear of war. We just got people home from Afghanistan, and now Vladimir Putin decides that he's going to let his mental illness take over the whole world. And there's a real concern for the people there in the Ukraine that are suffering. And I personally, I'm a war history buff. I read a lot about the Civil War, World War I, World War II, all of the wars that our country have been involved in. It's always been of interest to me, and it became more of an interest as I worked with veterans. But I believe we're in real danger of a potential global war, okay? So all of that overshadows everything. But those kinds of toxic things, we've also got issues with this crisis of opioids, and believe me, there's all different forms and versions of fentanyl that are coming into the country that are lethal and dangerous and of great concern. And I just want to say this, it's not just in the African American community. People in all communities are getting caught up in the severe use of opioids and dying, okay? And so let's not be, naive, and let's not just think it's one community. And so the other thing we need to do is break out of this kind of myopic, that's the word I'm looking for, view that certain things are just affecting one community and not another. We are all in trouble in terms of this opioid epidemic, okay? And I don't know how that's even going to be stopped. I think that we have, so I mentioned the healthcare system. Thank you. Go back one. That's the slide that I'm on. I don't know if you can read it. I've made the font too small. So we're talking about threats of war, which also impact our economy. We're still struggling with this pandemic, and we're overwhelmed, our healthcare providers, with this pandemic. And so it makes it more difficult for them to recognize and address mental health concerns because they're struggling to keep people breathing and well. I think some of the other things that are masking and interfering with our ability to face this issue is how we've kind of moved away from, I don't know how to put this. I think when we grew up and raised families, I think we know that there's certain things that we learn as we're growing up. Certain basic ethics and morals and how you behave and how you treat people and being decent and being, where do you learn that? Where did our generation and other people, you know, everybody here is not the same age, there's older and younger. Where do we learn those things? Do we learn them from our parents or the people that raised us? If we went to a church or a faith-based community, we may have learned it there. Sometimes you learn it at school, sometimes you don't. I don't think it's being taught at all. I think we are failing to teach our young people. I think we're kind of assuming that somehow they're learning things like respect. How do you care for another person? How do you treat another person? How do you treat an older person? How do you treat a younger person? I think the internet, this wonderful invention we call the internet, has become a monster that is totally out of control. So now we have, you can Google and find out anything, you can get on a chat and talk to anybody in the world, but you can also talk to criminals, and you can talk to pedophiles, and you can talk to cruel and mean people. There's this thing called the dark web, which I don't know where I've been. I just kind of found out about this dark web. Somebody was talking about it, and I said, what is the dark web? And they said, oh, gosh, you can Google things like how to murder someone, how to commit suicide, and they'll give you a step-by-step guidance on how to kill yourself, or how to poison someone, or how to get rid of a body. They've got videos of the most filthy things that you could ever imagine, and children can go right into the dark web and view things just like an adult can. There's no protection. And what are we doing as busy parents? We're on social media, we're on the telephone, and the kids are on there too, and I am seeing a host of young people who spend 6 hours a day on the internet. They're up all night long. Mom and dad are asleep or working 2 jobs or whatever their parents are doing, and the kids are on the internet. They're looking at pornography. They're looking at crimes being committed. One young man told me, yeah, that's how I learned how to shoot a gun, on watching them, and so you all know what I'm talking about. And I went to an IT specialist, an information person at my job who is an expert, and I said, is there any way to stop that? And he said, no. The toothpaste is out of the tube, and there's no way to stop it. And so while we are trying to address mental health concerns, the very things sometimes that we think are helping our children and educating our children and providing information to our children are the very things that can destroy them. You also know that young people are getting addicted to the telephones. They're getting addicted to the iPads, and someone was telling me about having a family member a young person who they can't get them to stop looking at YouTube. Christmas, I spent home with my older sister, and my great niece, her granddaughter, is 9 years old, beautiful little girl, smart as a whip, sings like an angel, and every single night that I was there, her poor mother had to battle with her to turn the telephone off and go to bed and get ready for school the next day. It was literally a battle. Turn off the computer and lay down and go to sleep. So again, the next slide was about the cost of this. It makes sense that we're going to see more addiction to technology, and we're going to see more and more of the impact of this negative imagery, violent imagery, inappropriate imagery that young people I can't handle it. I don't look at it. I tell everybody that I know, don't be tempted to look at that type of material. You might be tempted to look at it, but it is not healthy for your mind to take in that type of toxicity. Once you see something, and I apologize, I had a picture of a brain and I said, I'm gonna take that out, that's too much. But the brain, through our five senses, eyes, nose, hearing, taste, and touch, take in all of this information and formulates memories and keeps them permanently. Once you take in that kind of information, you can't make it go away. And that's part of what creates post-traumatic stress. So I've lost track of where I am with my PowerPoint, but the point that I wanted to make is that I'm concerned about the healthcare system finding a way of better providing for mental health concerns in a way that are accessible, that are not beyond the cost of those that need it, and look at reaching all of the populations of people that need it. And really, it's all of us. We're living in a time that is so full of crisis. The political crisis, concerns about democracy, all of the things that I mentioned are weighing on all of us, as well as the pandemic. And I'll tell you one thing that's good, the silver lining in all of these worrisome, toxic things that I mentioned, the good thing about it is it level sets us. Because I've had people tell me, no, I've never been depressed, I've never been anxious, I don't know why anybody would be suicidal. But I think this past year that we have had has taught all of us what depression is, right? What loneliness is, what anxiety is, what it is to be fearful to go out of your house and talk to your neighbor, or to go to work, or you forget not wear your mask and talk to somebody for a few minutes and then go home and worry if you've contracted something. I think with all the civil unrest, with all that's happened, I think we have to look at all of the issues that are going on rather than with fear, come together as a community and look at solutions. And I think we need to break down the barriers of race, break down the barriers of gender, stop acting like one thing is happening to black people over here, and another thing is happening to white people over here, and another thing is happening to Hispanic people over there. That's not true. Let me talk about violence for a second. We know that the rates of violence in the United States of America really reached a peak. I need to go back to the microphone. I like to talk straight to people, but I got to stick to the microphone. So apparently we reached a really murderous peak in the 80s and 90s. But from that point, we actually began, and probably the law enforcement folks will talk about this and have much more knowledge about this, but apparently we did begin to see a decrease in violent crime across all of the United States of America over the past 20 to 30 years, we were seeing good strides. But something has happened post and during the pandemic where now we're suddenly seeing this huge uptick in violent crime and the use of weapons, and primarily it's among our young people. But I also want to share that also along with the homicide rates gradually dropping and now suddenly spiking back up are the suicide rates. The suicide rates in the United States of America have been climbing for 40 years. And so there are about 45,000 suicides a year in the United States of America. And if you want to just compare it to something, there are about 30,000 homicides. We have about 500,000 people attempt suicide each year in the United States. Who are our most at-risk populations? Teenagers. But now it's starting to look like, and this is all races, everyone. Okay, thank you. This is all races, that the suicide rate has been climbing and has been really very, very significant. And so now we're starting to see that it's climbing even more and even more exponentially than the homicide rate. And it is primarily among young people. So we know that young people are what? They're growing, their brains are not fully developed, their identities are not fully developed. When they get to puberty, they've got this release of hormones, they've got all kinds of emotional things going on and challenging them. But just think about being young, and as the Reverend said, and having all of these toxic things going on around them that I just talked about. And how fearful and how much duress, aside from whether they have resources or not. I truly believe that a lot of the violence are in those communities where people do not have resources, do not have hope, perceive themselves as less than, perceive themselves as somehow rejected or not a part of. And that was in my PowerPoint. I apologize for not using the PowerPoint. I'm just kind of erupting up here. But I believe that children who are able to somehow be aligned with a sense of hope, a sense of, I can get an education, I can get a job, I can be like this person, I can be like the police officer that is known in my neighborhood, the minister that's in my neighborhood, the school teacher that's in, if they can get a snippet of someone that they can emulate, that's the direction that they will go. If they see that the only source of money is the drug interaction, that's the way that they will go, okay? So I don't think it has anything to do with race, and I don't think it has, I think that's just too superficial, okay? I think we need to do better with our parenting. I think we all need to put our phones down and put our social media down and pay more attention to the children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews around us, but I think that's true for all communities. The statistics that I had, which are probably on slide 3. Yeah. Okay, so when you talk about funding and political things like that, I don't really know how that works. It's one of the challenges that I'm having with trying to sort of vocalize almost a positive revolution. I'm not talking about a negative revolution. I'm talking about how do we surge? How do we make a strong impact to change the way things are now? Whatever it is that we're doing now, in my humble opinion, is not working. The youth violence is getting worse. It is not getting better. I think our law enforcement community is doing a good job of, and they'll probably talk about this, looking at programs, doing bias training, doing training to interact with mental health persons. And I'll let them speak to that. I believe that we need to also find a way to remain connected with our law enforcement community, remain and bring together the faith-based community and bring all of these entities together to work together. I think working all by themselves is not going to work. Whether the politicians take that money and don't make sure that it goes where it needs to go, I don't know what to do about that. But I think we can hold people accountable. We do know that youth programs are successful. There have been successful youth programs. That was one of the things that Marion Barry was known for, were his youth programs. The youth programs in New York were very effective in lowering crime rates. The youth programs in Detroit were very effective for lowering the crime rate. So do we need more youth programs? Yes, we do. So in the interest of time, let me just say this. I've got an idea for a process by which we can bring together faith-based communities, the law enforcement community, the mental health community, and surge all of those three entities together to bring impact in communities that are at risk. I have an idea of how to do it, and I am looking for a way to initiate it, and I'm going to be working with Donata Edwards and whoever else is willing to work with me. I have already started calling ministers. I have already started speaking to some law enforcement persons that I know, and I'll be happy to speak to these folks over here and whoever else might be interested in talking with me and working with me to put this together. Very quickly, I think we need to kind of declare kind of a truce, a period of nonviolence, where we ask the whole of the communities, as far as we can reach as many communities as possible, to stop the violence. And then surge resources to those communities through places of worship, because those are safe sanctuaries. And have mental health professionals, social workers, law enforcement officers, and ministers, imams, people who are the ministers of a particular faith, all come together in teams and interact with these young people and to get them into processes of A, finding jobs, B, getting mental health resources, and family intervention resources. So I'm just going to stop there so that Mr. Collins has enough time. And I'm going to be here the rest of the time. Okay? Come on, Mr. Collins. Okay. Thank you. All right.
Frank, give me the sign when you're ready.
My notes? Okay. So say I worked down at the Naval Research Laboratory for almost 40 years, almost like a homecoming. It's been a long time. The title of my presentation is A Survivor's Perspective. I had PTSD. I'm an old Marine. I got through my Marine Corps service without a scratch, no problems. But in 2009, I had a stroke, hemorrhagic stroke. Very serious. I wound up after that with a very serious case of PTSD. as I went through the treatments, and I had all of them. I had the talk therapy and drugs and any treatment that was available, got me through it finally. But I realized that there were so many folks, so many Marines and veterans in general, coming back from Afghanistan, Iraq, who had PTSD. And having recovered, I thought, hey, this is a perfect opportunity for me to go help these guys. You know, I can look them straight in the eye and say, closer to the mic? Closer to the mic, wow. We're going to be very close friends. Okay. I realized that having recovered from PTSD, that I had a perfect opportunity to help these guys coming back, because I could look them straight in the eye. I'll probably have more trouble with that. How's that? Still okay? Hey, all right. Hey, I got a round of applause for that. That's great. I realized that having recovered from PTSD, I can help these guys come back simply by understanding what they're going through, tell them that I've been through it, recovered, okay. So I set about to do that. Doing a bunch of other drinks, methods, and we formed a foundation. Can I? Urban warfare, the reverberation of explosions. major contributors to brain injuries. And again, I put numbers here, but 800,000 Iraq and Afghanistan brain injury veterans. The statistics say that 21% of those with a traumatic brain injury will wind up with PTSD. And this is bottom bullet I put here. It's not a math test, because you can go look at statistics and you will get all kinds of numbers. They're all big numbers, is the point. And it no matter where the numbers came from, it points to the fact that we've got a major problem with these mental illnesses, PTSD, results of traumatic brain injury, or just our social interaction. Then I wanted to define a little further the difference between PTSD and TBI. The PTSD is a psychiatric disorder. It can occur to anybody, anytime. And if you look at the next bullet where it starts with natural disaster, terrorist accident, and so forth, all of those in black are common to all of us. I don't care who you are, veteran, non-veteran. The war and conflict one is what is added to the veterans community, and that's a result of being exposed to explosions. Otherwise, we're all in this together. This affliction is an equal opportunity employer. Doesn't care, race, religion, sex, age, no matter. PTSD is, we're all exposed to it, and we're all vulnerable. And the fact that one of the things that happens with, especially veterans, there's a stigma associated with traumatic brain injuries and PTSD, such that people don't want to come forth, in particular veterans. Us tough guys are taught, hey, you're tough, you should be able to handle that. It should roll off and you can take it. Well, let me tell you, when you get there, you realize you can't take it. And that's devastating, because you think you should be able to take it, and you can't without help. And the fact that you are vulnerable doesn't mean that you're weak. It just means that you got hit with the right set of circumstances. And the other thing about this is that with this is the next bullet. The PTSD victims continue to produce high levels of hormones that will actually cause a brain injury. So you can wind up with a brain injury either way, whether you got it physically or emotionally, has the same result. And I can tell you from my personal experience, I wound up at Johns Hopkins in the psychiatric group working with psychiatrists to get me out of this depression. And they ask you, well, how's it feel? Well, all I can tell you is that my description to them was, it's like being at the bottom of a very deep black hole that you can't get out of. And you're convinced, your psyche is telling you that there's no place worse than you are. And that's what leads a lot of these folks to suicide, because it's the only way they see out. I was suicidal, so I know. I got to the point where I thought anything's better than where I am. And I'm very fortunate. I had a very supportive family, and I managed to climb out of the hole. And once again, that's what prompted me to go try to help these guys that I know are in the same place. And I just recently, I'll go back to my the foundation. What we do is we raise money to pay for treatments that these folks can't get within the system. And it's really hard to convince the guy. First of all, you have to convince this guy to get the treatment without getting himself in trouble with the VA, which can happen if he goes outside of the VA for some kind of treatment. And so you have to lead him through that and make sure that he has checked all the boxes so he's not going to get in trouble. And once you've done that, then you can get him into the kinds of treatments that we promote. And perfect example, just a week ago, got this guy into treatment about 6 months ago. He's through the treatments. He wrote me a letter that said, you know, when we met, I was suicidal. You convinced me to go into this treatment, and today I'm fine. And we've done that more than once, and you talk about a wonderful feeling. To be able to do that with someone and see them recover from a place where it was horrible. I have a group that comes to my home. I live on the water. And there's a group called Healing Waters. It's veterans. It's a group out of Fort Belvoir. And what they do is they take these guys who have PTSD, they teach them how to fly fish. It's a very benign event, fun to do. They take them out, teach them how to make fly rods, and take them fishing. So it's a very calming environment. Well, since I live on the water, I have this group come to my house every year for a fishing trip. And when these guys come in, and some of them are, you know, have dogs, or they're, you know, they have prosthetics, wheelchairs, and some of them look perfectly okay. But you can look at them across the yard when they get out of the bus and know that this guy's got a real problem. Just their whole demeanor, it's very, very obvious that he's got a problem. So that's kind of how I select the guys that I'm going to work with through our foundation, and so far it's worked out really well. And I guess the last bullet on this, 8 out of every 10 PTSD victims is a civilian. So this is not, you know, isolated to the military guys. Same problem, same solution, hopefully. Yeah, now you know, this kind of, any of us who has a traumatic event will suffer post-traumatic stress. It's normal. Automobile accident, fall down, whatever. We will have this period of stress. And normally, whatever that means, that will go away with time. When it doesn't, and it becomes more severe, then it's PTSD, then it's a disorder, and it needs to be addressed. And I guess the last bullet there I think is particularly interesting. You know, some folks recover within 6 months. The main point there is that many of those don't recover. And they're the folks that wind up homeless, either addicted to drugs, alcohol, they're incarcerated, or they're suicide victims. And it's because they are, I'll go back to the military. If there's a guy if you're a platoon leader, and there's somebody in your platoon who is a bad actor, suddenly he's not doing his duty anymore. He used to be a good squared away Marine, and now he's a mess. Well, that very likely can be associated with PTSD. And he will be punished, so he can be put out of the Marine Corps or out of the military with what is called a bad paper discharge, which means that he's just told to leave. He gets no benefits, he's just let go. And there are thousands of those that hopefully we're beginning to that are beginning to look at him again. Because, you know, here's this guy who got a TBI, came back and his performance goes to hell, and they throw him out of service. And that leads to these, you know, alcohol addiction, homelessness, and all the rest of those things. Big problem. This next one, especially as veterans, might like this one. And when you're talking, I've talked to groups of old Marines and veterans in general, and often when you say PTSD, there's a kind of silence that comes over the room. It's like it sucks the air out of the room when you say that. And you hear people say, well, how about World War II? Or, you know, you didn't hear about that. And, well, they didn't hear about it, but it was there. And that's why I put this slide together. If you look at the history of that condition, it goes all the way back to 1700s. And it goes on from there. And all they did really is Civil War, they called it soldier's heart, or irritable heart. World War I, shell shock. War neurosis. World War II, battle fatigue, combat stress. Korea, gross stress reaction. Vietnam, PTSD. And by the 1980s, they were starting to realize that this was not only peculiar to military guys. And that's the PTSD term kind of encompasses all that. But looking back all those years, it's the same condition, just with different names. And I can remember as a kid, I had uncles, many who were in the military, who served in combat in Europe and the Pacific. And when they came home, people would say, you know, yeah, Joe's back, but he's different. He's just different. Well, he was just different because he had PTSD. But nobody ever fessed up to that. They just sucked it up and tried to get on with it. But you still had the same problems then. It's important to realize that historically, there's nothing new here. It's the same thing. And of course, as you all know, I think, you folks are not totally unfamiliar with this stuff, but vivid flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, nightmares, distress, reminders, you know, and the physical sensations, chronic pain. That's one of the things that this fellow just had treated. He told me that after his first several treatments, his headaches went away. And he had these chronic headaches for several years. And after the first few treatments, they're gone. Wow. Sweating, nausea, trembling, sleeplessness. When I had PTSD, couldn't sleep. I also had anxiety. And I also had suicidal ideation. But the sleeplessness is horrible. You go to bed, you just can't sleep. No matter what you do, you just can't go to sleep. And because you can't go to sleep, the condition gets progressively worse. So somehow you have to break that cycle. It's really tough stuff. And your TBIs, your traumatic brain injuries. And of course that's up to the head, you get hit, whacked. And TBIs, you know, I guess the first thing I think about that, and they're all listed here, and I won't read them to you, but what were TBI causes? Falls, motorcycles, sports, being struck, child abuse, and the last one, the blast injuries. Well, the blast injuries are peculiar to the military. So you take all the green ones, and they apply to all of us, no matter military or not. But you put that last one on there, now you get the military guys. And that's what makes their numbers greater. Because if you are exposed to a blast, you know, some people think if you're not bleeding, you're not wounded. Not true. The blast can rattle your brain tremendous. It's a severe concussion. Although you don't have any marks, you are still hurt dramatically. And of course, there are 3 levels: mild, moderate, severe. The mild ones, you think about football players who get multiple concussions. And over time, the damage is cumulative, so it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. I remember Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer of all time, perhaps. I traveled a lot with work, and during the last few years, he would be on the airplane flying from LA to Washington, Dulles. Maybe half a dozen times I saw him. And he could barely walk, he had tremors, he spoke very softly, very nice, pleasant guy. Had lots of symptoms of Parkinson's. And it was from repeated concussions that he got boxing. You know, so watching a guy like that to the point where he can barely walk tells you that stuff is real and horrible. And the football leagues are beginning to acknowledge that. And this the next slide is a pretty good graphic as to how traumatic brain injuries work. You know, the first one, oops, excuse me, lady. So, you know, a punch in your head, a hole in your head, pretty obvious. The one in the middle acceleration, deceleration. Football. Think about this, guys. They put these huge helmets on them that don't do a damn thing, really, because your brain is gelatinous. It's jelly. And when you get whacked like that, the brain is sloshing inside your head, regardless of the helmet. The helmet protects you from getting a punched hole in your head, but it doesn't protect you from that slosh. Repeated injuries like that will lead you to dementia, Alzheimer's, and worse. Now the third one, the blast injury. With the blast injury, what happens is it hits you with multiple concussions, milliseconds apart. It's like a jackhammer. And that goes through your entire system, into your bloodstream, and ultimately into your brain. And now you've got a TBI related to this multiple concussions that you suffered within milliseconds. And next, I call it current treatment protocols. Basically, two major ones. Drugs, which is the first thing in my case. I went to Hopkins, and of course they do a little analysis, examine you and determine that, yeah, verily you do have depression, major depression, another name for PTSD. And the first thing they do is they prescribe a drug. SSRIs, they're antidepressant drugs. Now they have some really terrible side effects. And the folks are very good. I don't mean to, they were excellent, very caring, very compassionate, and they're using the tools that they have. And it's obvious that they tell you, they put you on these things very carefully, just a small dose at a time, like 25 milligrams, not much. And they're going to get you to 200, and that's going to take a couple of months. And they tell you right up front that during this 2-month period, you're really going to have a rough time. Well, a rough time means suicidal, horrible, absolutely horrible. When you're being weaned up to your full dosage. And then, should you ever stop, you can't stop taking them. And if you do, it has to be weaned off the same way. If you do it so abruptly, you are in a real world of hurt. It's one of the problems with the way the military handles it. Instead of having a psychiatrist giving out these drugs, you've got a corpsman. He's another Marine, and he gives you a handful of these things, and you get back into combat. Rough stuff. So the drugs. And then there's the psychotherapy, talk therapy. And that, I've also had that. I can recall it was expensive. I had to pay for it. And it took like 8 weeks, and you sit with a therapist. And it requires a whole lot of discipline. You have to keep records, and something that I'm not real good at. And it didn't do me a whole lot of good. And I will. So that one didn't do me much good. I had the treatment, did it. I tried real hard to make it pay off, but it didn't for me. And I guess this is the next one. If you look at the medical profession, which is certainly full of wonderful people, and they do heroic things, but we've been doing the same thing now for 20 years, in particular with the veterans. And the suicide rate just keeps getting worse. So to me, it says that, I'm an engineer, by the way, it maybe explains why I look at it this way. But if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result, Einstein said that's the definition of insanity. So it says to me that we got to make some changes. We got to do something different. And fortunately, there are some options that are available today. We have these emerging alternative treatments that have been well vetted in many cases. And all these that I have listed here have been used, and they're proponents of all of these treatments for treating traumatic brain injuries. And the folks that are familiar with these think we should be using them today, and they are used to some extent, but not nearly as widely as they should be. And I just picked one example here, the hyperbaric oxygen. And it's the one I'm most familiar with because I've had this treatment as well. And after having this treatment, I get off all my medication. And, it's been a couple of years, and I'm fine. This is as good as I get, folks. Not much, but this is it. Now, with hyperbaric oxygen, 17 successful clinical trials. That's been peer-reviewed, going through the whole 9 yards for approving treatments. And we help heal over 7,500 brain-wounded warriors and civilians. They're safe, effective, affordable. And this is the last line here. If you want to learn more about hyperbaric oxygen, go to treatnow.org, and it gives you all kinds of good information about TBI, PTSD, and available treatments. But this one, what the treatment consists of is you are breathing 100% oxygen. Put you in it's like in an MRI. Slide you into a tube, close it, and then backfill it with, this thing doesn't like me. Backfill it with 100% oxygen, and you stay in that atmosphere for an hour. That's one treatment. Now what that does, it supersaturates your bloodstream with oxygen. And that oxygen is what heals the wounded brain. And it works. And I don't want to imply that that's a silver bullet and it's going to help, it's going to cure everybody all the time. Not true. But our experience says that in about 80% of the cases, we have sent guys back to active duty, given them their lives back. And it's an alternative. It's one of the alternative treatments that is available today and should be used more widely. And I'll go to this last slide, and then I'll sit down and shut up. And this is what I hope for the future. These emerging treatments, like hyperbaric oxygen, they could be used in combination with the ones that are in place today. You can still use your drug therapy if it's appropriate, and your talk therapy. Don't have to throw anything away, but just add into the mix these other treatments. And the side effects for these alternatives are minor, if any, in their short duration, so they're almost negligible. And while we keep debating this back and forth, the suicides keep going on. So we got to get off the dime with these things. And I just sincerely hope, and this foundation I talked about in the beginning, that's what we're up to. We're a 501c3, we, all volunteers, nobody gets paid for anything, can't do that. And we know we're doing some good. And I just hope that some other folks in the medical community will, and they are looking, I'm not implying that people aren't looking at this stuff. We just need to turn up the game and a sense of urgency that I don't see. And I'd like to. Legislation, one more, I just get going, I can't stop. I go down to the state legislature and trying to get legislation passed to make these kinds of treatments more available and addressing the whole suicide issue. And what you get back from the politicians, and I'm not knocking them either, but you get a lot of sympathy and a lot of sage nods, and then they will actually pass legislation. Maryland did. But the legislation said that they are going to do a study, and they'll look at it again in 2 years, and then they'll look at it again in 8 years. Well, what the hell is that? What that means is we have done something. You push this, okay, we did something. And it's absolutely nothing. We need help tomorrow, not 8 years from now. So we have to keep pushing the politicians as well. So, folks, with that, and by the way, I was at Old Marine. I was with Washington at Valley Forge, and you know how that worked out. So. Okay, thank you.
Lamar.
That's a hard act to follow. I'm the guy that has to talk, and then I'm the guy who's holding up the lunch. Not a good place to be, but I will take a few minutes. I'm Lamont Mitchell, Imani Catering. I've been catering in the city for 35 years. Thank you, doctor, and I'm happy to be here. But there are a couple of reasons why I'm happy to be here. One, I lost my brother. I buried him last year, and he suffered from mental illness for 35 years, 40 years in this city, living homeless on the street of 7th and T, which was 2 blocks from where we were raised on 9th and T, with very little services available. You know, it's hard to tell somebody to go to shelter if they have a mental problem. They don't want to go to shelter. They want to live on the street. And he lived on the street. He lived his house on the street for 35 years, so it's very, very close to me. And so when he died, I decided to have his funeral on the street. And I had his funeral at 7 and T. I put up a tent, and I did 2 things. I talked about mental health issues as it relates to the homeless, and I also talked about the lack of services from the district government for homelessness and for mental health. And then I fed the homeless. So it was a great time. He lived his life on the street. His funeral was on the street, but that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about the food, and we're going to eat, but one of the things I talked about with Donata in this program was that if you're going to talk about mental illness, you can't do that without talking about eating for mental for mental health. You got to eat right. You know, we were small, we grew up, your parents would tell you, if you eat your carrots, you're going to be pretty. You can see, your eyes will be good. If you eat your spinach, what will happen? You'll be strong, right? Yeah, if a kid got too much sugar, what do they say? Take the sugar from him because he'd be too what? Too hyper. That worked until we got 18. And then when we got 18 adult, we say we're going to eat every damn thing we want to eat. All the stuff that's bad for us, we still eat. So we reverted back to the children we were told not to eat. And as African Americans, I'm sad to say, I'm a caterer, that's how I make my money. We have the worst diet of anybody on the planet. The food that we love so much and so good and tastes good. Oh my God, it's literally killing us. But not only physically, mentally. We are what we eat. Therefore, we must take a giant look, and people won't say this. You know, we got to get that fried chicken up. That macaroni cheese is killing us. You know, and I serve it. I sell it. You know, it's called hard. And we have to look at the food that we eat. It's so important. So we decided that let's just do something different. You know, let's just change it just a little bit and talk about those things that happen to us. When we eat the bad food, when we eat food that's not good for us, processed food is literally killing Americans. It's killing us. It tastes good. And they have this thing that says you eat one of these potato chips, either whether it's a Lay's or Utz, and you can't put it down until you eat the whole bag. That's by design. The processed food, the products and the ingredients in that processed food make your brain want more of it. And so you think like, oh my God, they're so good. No, you are addicted to potato chips. Your mind is getting this processed food. So we have to, cut down on our processed food. We got to almost cut it. And we talked about, a lot of people talk about when they were in the South, their granddaddy, he lived to be 105 because he got up early in the morning. He got his rest. He ate fresh vegetables. He ate fresh meat, lean meats. And he didn't have the processed food. He didn't have oodles and noodles or oodles and no noodles. He didn't eat that. He didn't eat beefaroni out the can. He didn't eat all this processed TV dinners. It's literally killing us. But there are some things that we can do to help our mental health. What we eat affects the way we feel. We can get agitated if we eat certain food. We need to know how our bodies react to food. It is medicine. It is what we eat. There is a direct correlation between your gut and your brain. You put it in the gut, and it's like an automatic nerve. I don't know. The doctors may know the term for it, but there's an automatic nerve that goes from your gut to your brain and say, "Give me some more of that. I want some more of that. That doesn't work too good for me." And we become angry when we eat certain food. You need to know what makes you feel the way you feel. If you're getting angry all of a sudden for some reason and all you did was ate some fried potatoes, you may have to say, that's the fried potatoes that are making me get angry. You know, we are what we eat. And so we decided that we would do something different, and we got some dishes here. Aside from the sugars, we can talk about the sugars all day long. Cut them out. If you're 30 years old and you eating sugars, cut it out now. If you expect, I'm 67 years old. 67 years old, and I cut out beef and pork 44 years ago. On a 1-week dare, I dared myself not to eat beef or pork for one week, and it went to 44 years. I have seen the difference in my body. I've never been to the hospital, never stayed a day in the hospital. I take no medicine at 67 years old. And it's only because I treated my body, I put the good food in my body, I try to stay fit. I walk. I started a walking program last year where we walk 10,000 steps a day, and some of raise your hand if you're in the Imani Walking Club. There she is. Some of the people are here, and then they're doing 5,000 steps a day, which is like almost 2 miles, and it makes a difference, and you're eating the good food. So today we started to do something different, and they want me to tell you what you're going to eat, and you try something. You know you got to get the colors in it. You got to get the vegetables. You got to stay away from the processed food. Processed meat, processed food, anything processed, stay away from. But there's a lot of other choices to eat. The vegetables, we eat greens and all. The darker, the better. I know you heard that somewhere before, but the darker, the better. The darker, the better. The collard greens, the dark leafy greens, the kale greens, the fruit. You need fruit every day. You need fresh, potable water every day in your body. It cleanses your body. It gets your mind right. It puts you in a better mood. It takes the agitation out. There's high sugar content drinks. Got to cut them back. If you don't cut them out, you got to cut them back. And you know, there's this whole thing, and I have my vegan, Fawn, raise your hand. Fawn is my vegan chef. She does, and if you get a chance, talk to her during lunch, because she has some great ideas on, because everybody's not going to be vegan. But maybe you go meatless Monday, meatless Tuesday, meatless Wednesday. So you get out of the habit that you got to have meat, particularly fried foods. That's not good for us every day. You can change your diet. Small little changes in your diet makes a big difference on how you feel emotionally. So today we have some, we're really high on the green. So we have some kale salad, some vegan kale salad that we made. I guarantee you, anybody eat this kale salad, they're going to love it. We have some seafood pasta salad. We have some regular 7-leaf salad. We have some rice, and as opposed to macaroni and cheese, which I love, but I don't eat no more, because it's just horrible for you. And then we have some salmon, which is high in omega-3s, fatty acids. Your brain needs salmon. Your brain needs omega-3 oils to function right. You have to eat your fish and sardines and other things that's high in omega-3s, fatty acids. And we have some baked chicken that you're just going to love, as opposed to the fried chicken. You know, we like that fried chicken, but it's not good for us. It's not good for our health. And we have, what else do we have? We have some rolls and we have some asparagus, the green things. And then we have some alternative drinks. We have some sugar-free iced tea as well as to regular iced tea, because everybody likes the regular iced tea, but water, drink your water. So we wanted to have something different. So we didn't just want to say, let's talk about mental health and not deal with the food we eat during this mental health session. So hopefully you will enjoy the food. And now we're going to have lunch. I'm going to stop talking. We're going to have lunch. We're going to ask this side right here to join that line on the left-hand side, and this side right here join the right side line, and then we'll go to the middle. You can start on your line. So we are ready to go. Son, are you ready? Great. The preacher's here. If she wants to say a blessing, she's welcome to do so. Reverend Holiness, would you like to say a blessing?
That's what happens when folks know you're outside of everything. You know, I'm walking out of Reverend Homes. Let us be grateful for the food. We are grateful for the food that is prepared for nourishing our body, for those who have prepared the food, and that we won't get fat from eating the food. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Ms. Sadiq speak while you figuring it out. Yeah, I'll go ahead and let Ms. Sadiq speak, and then after that, we'll play the video. Thank you so much. So is it the intro?
Do you have a presentation?
No.
It's after, right? So I'll just wait till.
Okay. You want to go ahead and start? All right. Okay, everyone. Hello. We're getting ready to get started now. Miss Sadiq is going to bless us with some knowledge from her perspective. Thank you so much.
For a little over 30 years. I've had an opportunity to work in Michigan and Virginia and DC and in Maryland, so I've had an opportunity to meet children from across the way. My primary responsibility has been to do evaluations. So when the children aren't learning the way we think they should learn, they're not keeping pace the way we think they should, and or if they present with behavioral or some emotional difficulties, it's send them to see the school psychologist. I'd like to be known as someone who's available as well, and not just when children have difficulties in school, but reality, that's what I do. So you don't get to see me unless there's some difficulty. Now, I have had the opportunity to work with children with all kinds of disabilities. Mental health is a major area. After COVID, mental health is a primary event every day, all day, on all grade levels. I can honestly say that post-COVID, or not really post-COVID at this point, but we're still very much in that process, I've actually seen children, the youngest children ever, who talk about suicide. Children in the first or second grade openly talk about their anxiety and their depression. Kids talk about what medications they're on. They talk about their therapists or lack thereof. And all of it amounts to the same thing. There are a lot of unmet needs inside the schools. The primary thing that I see children needing are relationships. We can talk about medication and doctors and therapists, and we can talk about the friendships that they don't have. We can talk about social media. It bugs me to see parents parenting with a phone in their hand. So by the time they come home from the hospital, or even when they're still pregnant, it's pictures and phones. The intimacy between the parent and the child has eroded, just like how much parents use the telephone. So the children don't even look in the parents' eyes anymore, they look in the eyes of the camera. It's really unfortunate that the parent and child relationship has eroded because of technology. We talk about the teens and social media, but it begins long before that. And people don't even realize what they're doing to the relationship between themselves and their children with that camera. When the child doesn't look in the mother's eyes, but in the eyes of the camera. And eventually they get sick of it. But the reality is, that's where relationships begin. So when you start eroding that relationship, then what happens when you come to school? And you don't get instant gratification. The teacher's not the internet. So you can't pay attention to it for so long because there are no commercial breaks. Everything that we do has impact. And if we begin to how we do what we do, and start to evaluate ourselves from the time we have children and bring them home. And we don't teach them necessarily to conform to societal norms, but whatever we think is cool for our household. A lot of people treasure their children, and some people don't do as much as we'd like to see them treasure their children. But the reality is, if you don't teach your children to be a part of a larger society, but just your household, and then all these different households get together, there are 25, 27 households represented in a classroom, and people aren't buying into the same behavioral system, the same respect system, the same learning system, and a teacher has to teach one system to everyone, then you have utter chaos. So I deal with a lot of utter chaos all day. I would strongly recommend that people, I could always choose a school for my child. One criteria was if the parking lot was full on parent-teacher night. Without the parent participation in an academic program, you don't have a lot to build on. So the more we can, as a community, reach out and reach into the schools, encourage and develop relationships with the schools, with the teachers, with the programs, the squeaky wheel always gets the grease. Right? This is what happens with the money. What happens with the money is what we allow to happen with the money. If you're not there and your voices are being heard, and the money gets spent the way the money gets spent. The reality is you do have power, and it's untapped power, because the power is in your voice and in your numbers. You see school board meetings where people are put out because they have such strong opinions. I'd like to see more of those meetings, especially in places like the District of Columbia, in places in impoverished areas. I always say it doesn't matter what you have as long as you keep it clean and you keep it neat. You don't have to have a mansion, you don't have to have $1 million, but you do have to have the confidence to use your voice. So we can build the confidence in the adults that are involved in the children's lives and get them to be a part of the larger community and use their voices. We can make a huge difference. But the more we sit and the more we relax and just hope that everything comes out okay, or just come in angry and do things where they have to call in the police. And speaking of the police, I do a lot. My life is special ed. I dedicated my life to American children when I was a much younger woman. But a lot of law enforcement doesn't know a lot about special needs students. So when you have a child with autism or a child who has intellectual deficiencies, and they've done something in the community that warrants them being apprehended, arrested, or admonished in some way, and they don't even know what you're talking about when you ask them to respond to a command, then there's a disconnect that can end tragically, as we've seen happen. And that doesn't have to happen if we have more of a relationship between education and law enforcement. All those things can happen if people use their voices. So I just encourage everyone, I didn't come today prepared to do a presentation, but I was asked to say something. So if I could say anything or relate a message to this group today, it would be to encourage each and every one of you, to encourage each and every one that you know to participate in the educational process. Whether you have children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that communities are built on the schools that are in those communities. If the school is strong, the community is strong, and your real estate goes up. Participate. Be involved. Have a voice. Use it. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes, ma'am.
I was talking to some teachers when the district first
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. real feel on the internet. So if you look at that parking lot and you can shoot a cannon through it on parent-teacher night, those same parents are available or not available for education when it comes to virtual learning. In all actuality, by the 3rd grade, and this is unfortunate, the light is out for education in the students' eyes. So when you take that fact into consideration, you can begin to see how children aren't necessarily going to be individually inspired to jump right in there and look at the absentee rate. Early elementary, children don't get themselves ready for school. So if the parent isn't participating in the day-to-day functions of school with the children when they're little, then you compromise with virtual and you take away some of that responsibility where the attendance factor isn't as, doesn't feel like it's as much force, and the parents have to do things additional to what they had to do before. It gets to be a lot on parents and on educators. However, it's still a partnership, period, and you have to have that relationship with the parents and that relationship with the community, with the school, and the children. You can't take any piece of it away, and you can't put all the pressure on any one piece either. All it does is break that piece down. So parents do have to participate, period. And unfortunately, we're not in a position where we have any leverage when it comes to parent participation. It's kind of like how I feel about teachers and contracts. The one thing that you cannot contract for is parent. You can present something, I can come in and never look at one side of the room and just call on 2 or 3 people all day long. But then that doesn't teach everybody in the room. And is that something that, over an observation, you can see that that's happening, but the child feels that every day. They know whether or not they're a part of what's actually happening. They know if they're a valued contributor to that classroom setting. So either you set the tone, because that's what you know you're supposed to do, and not judge how they look, how they smell, what their attendance is like, whether or not they have lunch, or their mother ever comes in, or you don't. So we have to include everybody, and we have to make everyone feel welcome to be a part of the process and have a voice in the process if we want them to participate in the process. So I saw a question on fire.
Excuse me, we have, what we're going to do is we have to, because of any effort of time, we've got a short video that we're going to show right now. Mr. Schwab, if you could come up, and then those others that are going to be on the panel, so that we can get those people up here. Mr. Deek, I invite you to stay on the panel as well.
Thank you guys for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
demostrado que efectivamente hay ciertas áreas relacionadas, áreas cerebrales relacionadas con la memoria musical de aquellas canciones que a cada persona le ha gustado, y estas áreas cerebrales están menos atrofiadas que otras partes del cerebro en este tipo de enfermedades. Probablemente porque la música tiene un poder inmenso desde el principio de los tiempos, ¿no? Ya en la prehistoria se encontraban instrumentos musicales, con lo cual parece que nuestro cerebro está preparado para ser un cerebro musical. Por supuesto, la música está absolutamente unida a las emociones. Nosotros también decimos que es importante la música en la enfermedad de Alzheimer, pero más importante todavía es hacerles sentir emociones, se sientan vivos, que se sientan ese tipo de emociones. Es muy importante porque al final las emociones se asocian a momentos de nuestra vida. Tenemos vídeo de una mujer con 99 años que había sido costurera y tenía una enfermedad de Alzheimer muy avanzada, pero al escuchar las canciones de su vida, pues hacía como que cosía, iba haciendo todos los pasos de estar cosiendo con una máquina antigua. Es un vídeo muy impactante, creemos que es muy bonito. La gente recuerde que la persona con Alzheimer y con otras demencias está muy viva hasta el final de sus días. Y ya no son las personas con Alzheimer, las personas mayores que están vivas, están llenas de recuerdos, llenas de emociones y todavía pueden emocionar a todo el mundo y pueden hacernos vibrar.
Thank you so much, Kale. We're going to go ahead and get everyone set up for the panel right now. And you don't have to use the table if you want to. Somebody can sit at the chair. Sit at the chair. Chairs. No, we'll just do chairs. Mic up here. Like that. Yeah, I'll stand. I'm gonna let you pass this down so everybody can, when they're ready for it. Okay, we ready? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Schwab. I'm a candidate for DC Attorney General, and I've been given a great honor of trying to facilitate a panel. Can you hear? Cannot hear me? How about now? Better? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Brian Schwab. I'm a candidate for DC Attorney General. And I've been given a great honor today to be with you, to listen, to learn, and to try to facilitate a panel discussion on the topic of mental health and law enforcement. Critically important issue, particularly as we see a crisis not just in Washington, D.C., but across our country in terms of trauma, in terms of people suffering, and the interactions between law enforcement and people in the community is requiring a particular lens on mental health, and we have a wonderful panel to talk about that today. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to let you hear from the experts. I'm going to try to facilitate the conversation, but why don't we just very quickly, if you'll give a 30-second introduction of your name, who you are, and you'll hear from each of these, and then we'll have some questions to each of you.
My name is Officer Donald Schran. I've worked for the Metropolitan Police Department for 20 years, both in Ward 8 and now I'm uptown near the Capitol.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Beabout. I've worked in public sector behavioral health here in the district since 1985. I'm now with the Department of Behavioral Health and serve as the first Chief of Crisis Services.
departments in the district, Virginia, and Maryland.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Haggerty. I'm currently Special Counsel for Public Safety and Youth Initiatives at the Office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia. Prior to that, I was a prosecutor in the Office's Domestic Violence and Special Victims Section, and immediately before that, I was a prosecutor in Dallas in the Crimes Against Children Division.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly O'Mara, and I'm the Director of Strategic Change for the Metropolitan Police Department, overseeing a wide variety of functions, and I'm happy to be here today to hear from the community and to talk to you all about what we're trying to do to be able to provide strong services to the community in this area.
Hello, my name is Aaron Sheptop. I'm a homeless advocate who's been advocating for homeless since 2006 here in DC. And I should say that I'm just a little bit biased in my belief that we should have started the conversation around homelessness because so many of them are mentally ill. You know, but that said, I want to also apologize for being so soft-spoken.
That's good, Eric. We're going to be able to hear you. You're projecting. So what I'd like to start maybe with Dr. Bebout, if you would just create sort of a platform for us to work from. When we talk about trauma-informed approaches to law enforcement, trauma-informed approaches to dealing with the community, can you give us a baseline of what at least that means to you and what the science tells us that means?
Yes, thank you. I'll speak up on that.
Good.
I'd like to start just for a minute and say a couple of other things, if I may stand up. You may have noticed Chef Imani had a pink ribbon on his ball cap. Everybody in this room recognizes that as a symbol of breast cancer awareness, right? Susan B. Komen says 1 in 8 American women will experience breast cancer. How many folks know what the ribbon color is for mental health awareness? Well, this is a very sophisticated room because usually nobody knows, and yet it's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 Americans, at least 1 in 4 Americans, will experience a diagnosable mental health disorder in their lifetime. Why don't we all know that? It's because of the stigma. Eric said this earlier. At lunchtime, it's 1 in 4, so let's go down the road. Who's and I raised my hand. Reverend Tillis talked about this. I'll say it not just because of me too, but to illustrate a point about stigma. I've lived for many, many years with chronic low-grade depression. And when I was first struggling with that and went through talk therapy and so forth, and considered taking an antidepressant, I probably suffered a couple of years longer than I needed to. I continue today to take an antidepressant, and my life is immeasurably better because I've done that. I discovered sort of accidentally after I began taking antidepressant, happened to mention it to one of my uncles, and he said, "Well, you know about Grandma, don't you?" And I, "No, I didn't know about Grandma." Well, Grandma had been hospitalized multiple times. She had actually been treated with electroconvulsive therapy. She had severe depression. And I was furious because I didn't know that. Now, I was in the business. I also didn't go forward and say, hey, I think I might be living with depression. Does anybody have suggestions? I mean, history in the family. But I didn't know what we don't talk about it because people suffer in silence. Unnecessarily. And stigma leads to long delays in people getting treatment. Treatment works. We don't have to. Treatment works. Recovery is the expectation, right? Now, we haven't yet achieved a level of precision medicine around treating psychiatric illness, but before I came to DBH, I was with Unity Healthcare at the jail. One of my favorite things there was to teach correctional officers about mental health and trauma. The doc earlier today said she didn't bring her slides with brain images. But if you look at brain images of somebody with depression and not depressed, or with trauma, with PTSD and not PTSD, sound like you. These are brain-based illnesses. And these are brain-based illnesses, and even people in my profession, I think, have historically contributed to a false distinction that there's mental health and then there's real health care, right? Shame on us. And then one of the most robust bodies of literature is on childhood exposure to traumatic events. There's a whole enormous body of literature called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it looks at a simple count up to 10, a simple count of the number of different categories of these 10 categories of bad experiences that people have experienced in childhood. And then, frankly, it came out of the Kaiser Foundation research. They were looking to find what were the best long-term predictors of health outcomes in adulthood. And it ended up being the very most robust predictor of long-term health outcomes, chronic conditions, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, was a simple count of the number of adverse childhood experiences people had before age 10. So this distinction between behavioral health or mental health and real health care is false. It's a myth. Now, the other thing I taught at the jail was that there's a direct correlation between number of adverse childhood experiences, bad things, ACE scores, and likelihood of development of alcoholism, likelihood of development of addiction to opioids, for example, and likelihood of incarceration. Trauma leads to dysregulation and to desperate attempts to find ways to regulate. If you're exposed to danger for an extended period of time and your body can't come back to baseline, you can't sleep, your head's on a swivel, you're looking all around, you're anxious all the time. If you discover that alcohol or something else that somebody gives you to smoke helps you to tune out, or to calm down, or to sleep, why wouldn't you? And so there are other factors that it's very complicated, but I think it's undeniable that one of the nurses for Unity came up to me afterwards and she said, you know, I thought this is in the jail. I thought these were bad people. But listening to you, I understand that these are good people that bad things happen to. And that sometimes big bad things, whether it was opportunistic or survival path or whatever it is. So what I mostly want to talk about with our partners from MPD is some very progressive things that we are working to do to change our response to people experiencing behavioral health crises. Currently and historically, it has almost automatically meant a law enforcement response. Somebody in uniform, this is a very decent guy, just had lunch with him, right? But if he even had been pulled over, somebody in uniform, your anxiety gets jacked up, and if you have repeated experiences throughout your life, it has the potential to escalate rather than de-escalate. We're trying to move away by diverting 911 calls for behavioral health crises to DBH rather than an automatic law enforcement response. Now, we need our partners sometimes and help keep the person safe, the community safe, keep us safe. But we've got to do a better job of creating new options for field response to people experiencing behavioral health crises. And I'm very excited to be partnering with
Let me get some more voices in, and we'll come back because I think it's very, very important to continue. This is exactly what I think we should be talking about. So maybe, Officer Schramm, can you give us a little bit of perspective on the challenge it is to be a law enforcement officer called to a scene by 911 where you have perhaps somebody who's struggling with trauma, struggling with perhaps substance abuse, maybe a mental health break, and you are being called, and what is the difference when you're there by yourself versus having partners from the crisis intervention team there with you?
yourself, you have to kind of determine what the problem, what's going on. Is it really a mental health issue or is it not? And that can sometimes take a little bit of time by asking people questions, that you're encountering. Excuse me. It can be, what's really tough is that when people are in crisis, they see the police and all of a sudden they think either they're getting locked up or there's a reason that we're there to harm them. And it's hard to convince some people that are in crisis that we're just there to calm them down and find out what's going on, because they don't necessarily need to go anywhere, just we want to make sure they're okay. And if they're not okay, then we go about different avenues. We do use our community response team, which is dispatched through the Department of Behavioral Health. And they come out and they can do an assessment. And sometimes while we're just talking to people, we've got them on, already started to come out to the scene, and they are great. Or sometimes when we can leave somebody, knowing that they're not a harm to themselves, we can ask community response team to respond out and make an assessment or figure out from there. They're actually very good. I'm not saying that to give you a boo, but they really are.
Terrific. So maybe just passing the mic down a bit, when I want to talk to the two of you in the middle there, both from the public health perspective and the school perspective. What is the response on the ground when you're actually encountering somebody who might be having a mental health or substance abuse type situation and you're not quite sure what's happening? What's the process that you're seeing on the ground in terms of assessing the situation and responding in a way that's safe, that doesn't create more trauma for the person, but also doesn't put anybody around them at risk or undue risk?
Yes, well, in my experience, we are often deployed to crisis situations. Sometimes they're humanitarian situations, disaster situations, you name it, we're there. And what I usually see is people who are feeling helpless, who are afraid, who have anxiety, depression, so many different things, unorganized thoughts. Just not truly themselves, as someone said earlier. And so what I first try to do is just assess that situation. As the officer said, I'm asking questions. I'm listening. You have to be an active listener. If you're not listening, you can't key into what someone's saying, and sometimes there's a misunderstanding, and I think that's what sometimes occurs. And so what I just try to make sure I'm doing is, again, active listening, using my social work skills to determine, okay, what is the next step? If they're in a safe situation, then I can kind of talk with them, maybe refer them to services. But if it's something more acute, then we try to make sure we get them to some type of hospital or somewhere where they can have those needs getting met, somewhere where they're safe from themselves as well as making sure that others around them are safe.
I've actually had the experience of working with the police in a crisis type situation when I was engaged in a home-based therapeutic relationship with a student, a young man who had taken a baseball bat and was literally demolishing the home that they lived in. The parents were both there and the police had to be called. And once the police arrived, they had shotguns, but I think the shotguns didn't have actual bullets in them. But for myself, you had to immediately establish a trust relationship between yourself and law enforcement, so that one could trust the other not to explode too quickly, not to move too quickly, and to allow each to intervene in the way that they've been trained to intervene. And the police were very willing to let me work with them. And as a result, I was able to get the student to calm himself enough to allow himself to be arrested and trust that we had his best interest at heart. He did do some damage to the home in the process, and he was quite irate when he was presenting, and we were able to get him to an emergency room and eventually into a hospital situation. But the student involved had to know that no one was really trying to harm him, that he wasn't going to have any major damage done. Parents had to feel that the people involved with their son were going to handle him with care and not just like to him in, if you will. And again, it's the communication, and it has to be instant because you don't have time to do a lot of fancy dancing. People have to buy into each other's energy and be able to work as a team to get the kinds of results that you want. I've had another situation in a school where a student had wanted to commit and express that desire, and I was able to get her to come into the school because she was in
Terrific. Thank you. We're going to keep going down the line. So, Lauren, talk a little bit about, from the perspective of the criminal justice system and our juvenile justice system in particular, which the AG's office has jurisdiction over. How does the law currently address the fact that sometimes young people, when they're making bad decisions, getting caught up in the criminal justice system, are also suffering from trauma, and that's part of the overall experience that's causing the interaction that kids are having even with their parents, in the community, in the school? How does the juvenile justice system work in relation to that reality?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think the last study that I saw, that it was upwards of 70% of youth who are in the juvenile justice system have some sort of mental illness or mental health disorder, right? And so that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a causal relationship, right? Just because you have a mental health disorder doesn't mean that you are more likely or more prone to commit a crime. But it is something that, as prosecutors, especially as prosecutor of the agency, that we have to recognize and address. Because what all right folks know about youth, well, let me ask the audience, right? Who here has a kid? Okay, who here has children in your life that you care about? Right? Who is here once a child before? Right? That should be everyone, right? And so what do we know about kids, for lack of better words? They're dumb, right? They make mistakes, and myself included. And so that's due to science, right? What we know about the brain science, that children's brains are not fully developed, right? That they don't understand the full consequences of their actions, or they think just kind of, not think things all the way through. And so when you compound that with mental health disorder or mental illness, it's a recipe for disaster, right? And so when we look at juvenile justice reform, especially with the AG developments here in the District of Columbia, we really try to recognize the mental health issues and aspect. So from beginning to end, you are going to see things like cognitive behavioral therapists, restorative justice, functional family therapy, multi-systemic therapy, in the plea offers that we're making, or with probation, or with commitment to DYRS. There's going to be that level of therapy and support that is given to the youth. That's so important that you don't see it across the country everywhere. And the Department of Behavioral Health and NPD have been really instrumental and key to that end. But that's a problem in and of itself, right? We shouldn't want youth to have to be entangled in the criminal justice system to receive services. And so that's why this summit here is so important, because we need to be proactive in terms of helping our youth, especially just knowing the brain science of their brain development and the issues that they're dealing with, whether that be PTSD, violence in their communities, depressive disorders, antisocial disorders, bipolar disorder, making sure we're addressing those underlying causes ahead of time so that they and their families are not having to enter the criminal justice system just to get help.
Thank you. So let me turn to you, Kelly. You have a really unique perspective and longitudinal look at the way our police work in the city and in confronting this issue. I wonder if you would share a little bit on the technology associated with when a call, we rely on 911 for almost everything, right? Whether the cat is up in the tree and we can't get the cat down, to somebody's confronting a very violent circumstance, we call 911. But that doesn't mean now that 911 will automatically send a police officer, right? So can you talk a little bit about that technological development and kind of how we're thinking about who we send out to respond to crises?
Absolutely, thank you. That's a great question. This is something that, if you think about emergency services and emergency response, 911 throughout its history has been essentially trained and programmed to send out one of two options, really: police or fire. And our Office of Unified Communications, and Dr. Bebop may want to touch some on this as well, they're moving into a realm where we're now having their operators dispatching not just to fire or MPD, but directly to DVH, as well as programs for Department of Transportation and Public Works. So they're undergoing a tremendous change right now, where operators are being trained to really divide a call up into more boxes. Which box does this fall into? Who's going take this call. So we've been working, Dr. Bebout and I have been working together for about a year now on a 911 pilot program where we're working with the operators to really identify the criteria for the calls that will go to DVH. And we started out with sort of low acuity calls, and since this is Dr. Bebout's realm, I'll let him talk more about what his team is doing. But they're co-located at the Office of Unified Communications so that there's a real communication back and forth. There's training for the operators to be able to identify this better. And then on our side, we're working together, DVH and MPD, to make sure that both of our teams, whether it's DVH employees or MPD employees, are going to know what avenues are available for them. My role working in management is to make sure our teams have the training and the tools and the resources to be able to do a response. So that's what we're working on.
Great. So Eric, let's turn to you, because I'd love you to share a little bit of your wisdom on what you're seeing from the perspective you as an advocate for the homeless, and what is the interaction with law enforcement like in terms of where you've seen positive, constructive interactions and where you think there could be rooms for improvement?
Okay, so I'll answer that. I should say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this too, that I'm actually not being honest, and I was Polish, and so when you talk about some of the behavioral stuff, what doesn't actually get teased out, so I'm going to say it anyway, is that I learned that 1/3 of people who go to foster care end up in jail, in prison, that kind of thing, and I can imagine that, if your foster parents told you you were 21, get out of here, don't come back, that happens a lot. It's about the money in many cases. I should say that my mom turns 85 in August, my Italian mother, I'm not Italian, I know I look it, and my father was Polish, and so I'm always explaining my last name. But that said, my father is deceased, so my mother and my Caucasian family members, we're still in touch, and I think that plays largely into a person not, feeling like trash. When you're 21 and you get kicked out, told don't come back, I can't get more money off of you, you realize you were a cash cow, that's got to kill their spirit, But that said, so dealing with the homeless, I would say this, that what stands out to me is not really so much the way that the cops interact with the homeless, but just the fact that we're always counting on the average person to understand at least a little bit about mental health. Because, you hear about these mass shootings, and it's like Jared Loughner that shot Gabby Giffords a few years ago. He had done some crazy things in the hours leading up to the shooting. His father had seen it, but his father didn't know what the signs were, and then, the rest is history. But people don't understand the triggers. I saw where a homeless woman, she was kind of a large woman, and she was walking between these narrow rails at a place called Something that Feeds the Homeless, and a guy bumped into her, and he didn't mean to, and she got all upset, and he's responding to her like she's a normal person, and I realized what was happening, and I said, Tacoma, that was her name, Tacoma, how you doing today? And as soon as I said that, she got out of that anger mode and just began talking to me, and they say change the topic. But anyway, if people don't know what the signs are, then they'll just be afraid, or they'll respond in the wrong way. I've seen a homeless person just shouting at nobody, and they were by the local library, and they coming across 9th Street, towards the library, like, should we go any further? And I was behind them about 5 feet or so, and I said, keep going. She's not going to touch you, just keep going. And she was sitting down, and so they said, it's okay? I said, yeah, it's okay. And they kept going, and nothing happened, But if you don't know what the triggers are, and you don't know enough to call the authorities when something is wrong, and in other instances, you don't know how to defuse the situation before the authorities need to be called. So we need to do a public education effort where we teach everybody, if the scene is kind of weird, here's how you deal with it. don't engage the person, you'll make it worse. You have to teach the entire public because they are the first line of defense.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to take it back to Dr. Bebout just to get a little bit more sort of specific on. My understanding is that when somebody has experienced trauma, you talked about trauma deregulating the way normal, if there's such a thing, normal reaction, and that we all have heard you can flee, you can fight, or you can freeze. Can you share a little bit about how that helps inform when you're training people coming into a crisis situation about reading what's happening in an overall circumstance? Because we read stories where somebody is directed by the police to do something and they don't respond, and it's perceived as being disobedient or worse, non-compliant, and the danger level goes up and it escalates. So can you share a little bit about what we know about brain science and how that helps inform the folks you're training?
So let me talk just a little bit more about the training that we're doing. The mayor, the chief of police, Kelly's office has committed to all officers at MPD, from recruits to officers on the street to CIO officers. We're increasing the amount of CIO training. We're doing refresher training for CIO officers. Recruits are coming out for 20 hours, and officers on the street are getting something called mental health first aid for first responders. And the notion of mental health first aid is really just probably self-evident, but the idea that with other health conditions, a stroke or a heart attack or somebody's choking, everybody recognizes some of the signs of those things. Everybody knows something they can do. They can do the Heimlich maneuver. They can call 911. We aren't literate, we don't have the language, and we don't feel empowered to take appropriate action when we recognize people in behavioral health distress. So CIO officers, and I was sharing a picture at lunch, I was walking around with a CIO officer just last week in Peppermint, and there was an individual that was clearly high and moving into medical distress. And he approached him very quietly, said what his name was, tell me what your name is, you're not in trouble, I want to get you some help, can you tell me when you last got high and what you used? And this gentleman's life was saved because Narcan was administered and the overdose was reversed. And I have a picture of them arm in arm smiling just 10 minutes after that. So it could be, again, we want very much for behavioral health specialists to be the lead responders for people in behavioral health crises. But when police need to be involved, we want them to be equipped to meet those crises with greater and greater insight, compassion, and sophistication, behavioral health literacy. So I'm very pleased with the investments that the city is making in that training.
Excellent, thank you. So, Officer Schramm, let me put you on the spot again. What kind of resources are available? What's the culture within the MPD? Because as I alluded to earlier, when you're a police officer and you're experiencing, viewing, seeing trauma for your career, and that weighs on you as a police officer, which must, of course, affect performance. What's the morale? We heard from a veteran, a Marine, saying it used to be you suck it up, you don't complain. Is there an evolving sort of morale in the MPD to recognizing how important mental health is for the officers, the people on the line?
Yeah, that's correct. There's a lot of compassion. The CIO training was very good. It's probably the best training I had at the academy, just so you know. And I'm not saying this, but it's something that I would think you'd want to capitalize it. And I can tell you, when an officer goes to a situation where somebody's in crisis, really the last thing an officer wants to do is put the person in a place that they don't need to be, whether it be jail or a facility. They don't need to be there. They don't want to put an officer there. We've got, sometimes when they're in crisis, they're all so high, and we've had to stop people from running out in traffic because they're so high. We'll call the EMS to send them to bring them to the hospital. We might write a form for them to at least have a psychiatric evaluation to make sure that they're not in distress when they come down. there's, there's CHAMPS, which is for children. There's, again, the community response team. We have just a lot of different avenues, places we can call. God, I'm trying to, you caught me off guard off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's just,
got them all back here. We can call, I have what we call CHAMPS, the community response team. There's a CPEP hotline we can call, which, that helps too. And there's just a myriad of different things that we can do. And sometimes you can ask them if they want to see their particular doctor at a certain hospital, and we can get them to their, without an appointment.
Right.
And that really works well. So even communicating with the person helps real well.
Excellent. And for all of us in the room, CHAMPS is an acronym for Children and Adolescent Mobile Psychiatric Services. CHAMPS, we're thinking about our young people if they are in need. And then we've got, of course, CIO officers is Crisis Intervention Officers. We talk in acronyms, but that's what we're referring to. Crisis Intervention and Children and Adolescents, right? Okay, so let me ask from the public health front, because I do still want to hear a little bit more about the training you go through before you go out to these environments where you're seeing such difficult situations, humanity really on the brink in a lot of these situations. Trauma is everywhere. What is the training you go through to make sure you're equipped to deal with it and to process it after you've been in the on the front line?
So as I say, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have my education that I received from school, of course, and my undergraduate education and my master's in social work. Along that, we have to do some training and get certain hours and be licensed to even practice social work. So in order to keep that license, I have to be involved in certain training, anywhere from trauma to working with different populations, cultural competence, so on and so forth. But in the core, the mission force specifically, we're doing disaster management preparedness. So I'm working a lot with how to manage disasters, just from every aspect, whether it's being in the command cell, and also just dealing with working with patients, whether it's other officers or civilians. So again, I'm doing trauma-informed care, trauma therapy. I'm learning more about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychological first aid. That is something that we're doing that's for all responders. So whether you're, an officer working with the police department, or you're in the public health service, or even just out at a regular civilian, you can also be trained in psychological first aid. And so that's been very helpful because it talks about the basics we talked about. Just active listening to someone, being compassionate, learning, just knowing about basic resources to share with individuals. So I have to say, honestly, that's the main thing I hold on to when I'm going out to these various communities, because my job is to assess and to be able to determine and triage and determine where someone needs to go. But first, I have to be willing to listen and understand, and again, be going to these different trainings. We are going to trainings such as chemical warfare, all different types of trainings within the Corps. But like I said, mainly for social workers, we are doing that trauma, some CBT, psychological first aid, and things like that, just to make sure that we are keeping with our basic skills and learning how to engage with people of all walks of life, with various mental health issues. Sometimes people just have some anxiety, just some basic depression. So not like they said, everyone needs to go to a facility. Sometimes they just need that person to kind of talk to them and make sure they get what they need and that they're heard.
So I want to be mindful of our time. We're coming up in 3, and I want to leave a little bit of time for questions if anybody has it. So let me just see if any of our panelists want to let me know that there's some critical minute piece of wisdom that you want to share before we turn it to the audience questions. I want to make sure we get a chance before we stop.
I'll be very brief, but I want to put in a plug for integration of people with lived experience. Certified peers that have training are a critical part of our mobile response team. We are engaging them more and more at CPEP to be welcoming.
CPEP stands for?
Comprehensive Psychiatric Emergency Program. There's a woman there who's a certified peer, and what she said so elegantly to me a couple of weeks ago was, where's the evidence? I'm the evidence. And the person coming through the door that's scared and doesn't know what's happening, to have somebody there that can look at them and say, I came here 10 years ago and I got help. Where's the evidence that this this works, I'm the evidence. And for our homeless outreach, for our global crisis, that's both on the substance abuse side and on mental health, that's a really critical part of our work going forward.
Excellent. Excellent. Message received. Okay. Awesome.
I knew I was going to have
Terrific. All right, so how about one or two questions from the audience, and then we got a lot of questions from the audience. So I'm going to, forgive me. Let me give the mic down. Why don't we go first way in the back, and then we'll take one from this corner, and then you, sir, are last. You're going to wrap us up, okay? 3 questions, because we're running out of time. Does anybody have an answer for that?
So in the interest of time, I'm going to provide my email address.
Good. Okay, I think we had a, okay.
So the Department of Behavioral Health has a line. It's 1-888-7-WE-HELP, which I believe is 793-457. No,
4357.
1-888.
793
4357. 4357?
4357. Let me just tell you, over the next year, nationwide, there will be a new 3-digit number, 988, that is going to be rolled out across the country for suicide prevention and for behavioral health crisis calls. Much easier than 1-888-7-WE-HELP.
Thank you. Okay, so our final question is, gentleman, right in the middle.
Mine was directed to Ms. Brandon. All the training that you have, and was that more in-house, or was it both in-house and field training to know how to deal with those certain illnesses when you're out there, and how long was the training, and just,
Great question, sir.
Here we go.
So with me, mine has been a lot just being in my profession as a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the Corps it'll be 5 years in November. And so again, just to even keep my license, regardless of being in the Corps, I have to go through various trainings. So I personally have a interest in trauma, cognitive behavioral therapy, mental health, right? So everybody has their own specialty. Some pick substance abuse, homelessness. I've done a little bit with all of those. So I personally have just made it my commitment to stay well-versed in all of those type of trainings. Some have been 2 or 3 days. Some have been months of training. Some have been certificates that I've had to do over months and go to classes. So I've done a little bit of all of that. Right now, I'm on a specific strike team, a deployment strike team with the Public Health Service. It's the first of its kind, and so we called it FIRST, the Public Health Emergency Response Strike Team. So we have different disciplines on this team, and so we're deploying to natural and man-made disasters, different types of situations. But for me personally, as a social worker in that team, I have to keep up certain trainings dealing with behavioral health. Again, the psychological first aid, just basic things, remembering how to engage with people from various populations, because I'm going all over the nation and engaging people who are vulnerable, who haven't been heard, who have mental health, who have medical issues. So I have to know how to talk to a little bit of everybody. So they're making sure for us behavioral health individuals in the Corps that we are dealing with, are going to these psychological trainings. Let's see, I went to one last month. Again, that was a week long. So it's just various ones. I'm getting certain certifications, dealing with trauma again, that I'm working on that. That's going to take a year. So it's kind of just depends on which one I'm in as to how long that takes. But for me personally, I have my own specialization that I personally care for, and that's, again, a training dealing with veterans. I'm getting a military and veteran counseling certificate now, and that's ongoing. It'll take about a year. So, again, we have certain specialized ones, but for the most part, it's up to that officer to go down their specific path that they're interested in and take that lead. So it's a little bit of both. Yes, exactly. You're correct.
That field training makes you a better.
Exactly. And then I think you asked about what do we do when we come back. So we call it like a hot wash, or just kind of basically when we demobilize or demob, we call it, we sit down and we talk with other professional social workers. So I talk with a team of social workers who are in the Corps like me, and we talk about, okay, what happened? How are you feeling? How are you processing? And we talk about self-care amongst ourselves, because how can I talk to my people that in the community about taking care of themselves and certain things they might want to do if I'm not engaged in the same practices? So
my Bible, of course, and I'm out there walking sometimes, I'm always going to need another bit of food for thought, because I want to know, and if I can help, that's how I give them back to them.
Exactly.
So, you answered my question.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you all. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, well, I hope you found the conversation informative. There's so much more to talk about on this issue, and I think we should keep talking about it as a community. I want to let Fred Hill have the final word today, but thank you all very, very much. I'm sorry we had to stop the conversation, and thanks to all of our panelists.
Why I cannot give the help that's needed. There is something you can do. You can make sure that you register to vote. It's far too often, and now this time, this year, you have the opportunity once again to make a difference. When you don't see things working for you in your community, in your home, in your city, like it should, check the voting records, check the candidate, check the incumbent, and find out who is best fit to serve your need. Rhonda, you had one.
I did, thank you, Fred, and I just want to give you honor for doing this, and Donata, this is awesome. While you're wonderful panelists and also wonderful doctors here, I'm Dr. Rhonda L. Hamilton, and I'm the president and executive director of MI Mother's Keeper. We're a mental health advocacy, and we come from the community perspective. We do our programs on the community level. We do much of our work in Ward 8. One of the things I'm concerned about is we put these wonderful programs, and I love that you guys did this, because there's so many different positions now who don't know where they should call, and they have a need. And so it's important that we're able to engage you all as such. I also appreciate you, Dr. mentioning the peer-to-peer advocacy, because I wanted to bring that up. It is so important that we allow folks with lived experience to integrate your wonderful systems, because of the fact that trust is so big in our community. We are in a nation's capital that
boots on the ground in Ward 8, where slumlord realities are real for many. The social determinants that you're speaking of, the fact that they don't know where they're going to eat, where they're going to work, or whether or not they're going to have housing is too important for us to keep trying to figure it out. We're boots on the ground. We love to work with you all for the benefit of our wonderful citizens. Thank you, Fred Hill and Ms. Donata, for doing this. The suicide rate is too high. That's our motivation.
Thank you again. We are going to close out. Oh, I'm sorry, Donata. Dr. Proctor? There you go, okay.
Thank you very much. I don't really want to take any more of your time. This has been a wonderful presentation. I did have something prepared. It will take a little time. Next time, if I can, then I can come up, I'll be happy to show. Thank you.
Is that name Dr. Crawford over to you, right? Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Okay. Go ahead. So much, everyone, for coming out to the first citywide, okay, video is over here. Yeah, the first citywide mental health summit hosted here today. We're going to close out with a video from Dion. And take time to look at it. It's a short video that's getting ready to get started. Later, you can go ahead and start the video. After the video, for those who are ready to leave, we're going to close them out. Thank you so much.
I was already addicted to pills, coke, alcohol, you name it. Some women are given substances when they are abused. Every time I leave him, he knew how to get me back. He would come to me apologetic with a handful of drugs. There are other women whose memories related to the experience were so powerful that they use substances to block things out. That was in my 50s when I started doing drugs. Instead of trying to seek help for my mental health, I went the other way and sought drugs thinking that would help. I was actually out there in the street doing drugs only about 3 years, off and on. So I had a very short stint out there, but it was an intense one. Now you're using substances, you're hanging out with people who are also using. Your likelihood to be incarcerated or to use prostitution as a way to support yourself goes up. That puts you even further in the world of drugs and alcohol. I've been locked up since I was 15 years old. Soliciting charges, petty theft, possessions, off and on. And every time I got locked up, I was under the influence of something. Community connections saved my life. Therapy allowed me to learn why I felt a lot of the things I had felt in my life. And why I did things in manners that I did. It was always trying to outwork the pain. By the time women come to community connections, there are a couple of routes by which they have gotten into addiction. But it's very hard to tease out the trauma, the abuse, and the addiction itself. They really become different threads of the same problem. You know, Christine may say, yeah, I can do that, I'd like to learn how to do that. And, you know, Tisha might say, I actually don't want to do that. In the course of running groups and doing various therapeutic interventions, we started to have women talk to other women. And it was very powerful. I always got exceptional feedback from magazine and felt that I could share anything, no matter how personal or how traumatic, and not feel that I'd be judged, you know. What we needed was a center where women could share their experiences, offer support, and also offer hope that there was a way out of these dangerous and violent relationships. Everybody in a good space today? Yeah, okay. That's right, that's right. Self-respect is not about what we do. I wish I had a center like Sisters Empowering Sisters when I was going through my worst time. It's a safe place, number one. A loving place, a place you can come and get hugged, a place you come and get a lot of support. Hi, look, you have your hair. Yeah, it's beautiful. How did that person work out? We're a pyramid center. Women just like me come every day there and with a soft voice and a strong hand saying, I'll pull you up. Hold on. I'll pull you up every day. Coming to this room and showed me how dysfunctional my family was and all that trauma and molestation. I still had some deep roots. Here's a real clinical program here. There are real groups, there are real goals, there are real objectives. About a year ago, I used to have so much low self-esteem about me. Yeah. And all I could do is, you know, all I could do is prostitute myself because I thought less of you. Today, and you can't come to me and say you got $20 and I'm going to dump in your car. And you say, the program is being implemented by women who have this kind of empathic resonance for other women. I was knocked down and I was told I wasn't going to be nothing. My family didn't believe in hugs, they didn't believe in kisses, they didn't believe in that. Right. So I had to build up my own respect, my own self-esteem, my own stuff. I had to look at the way they treat me and say to myself, I'm not going to treat nobody the way they treat me. Or my kids. It's like, wow, I'm really helping somebody. And I'm really telling my story. And it's possible to overcome alcoholism, not overcome even being recovery, but to deal with the trauma issue and deal with the things that always holding us back.
There's such a stigma with mental health. A lot of times we think we don't have a voice, or our voice is not important enough to be heard, but it is important.
I used to get severely depressed, and this has just put a whole new perspective on my life, you know, and given me hope. I think we talked about crying, you know, but I've been through emotional stress ever since I was 7 years old. And I try to share that hope with other women in the groups that I facilitate. My nose and the pain stop. You know, I'm tired of running, man.
You're going to be alright. You're surrounded by people who love you. We love you. You know, it might sound cliche, but we're going to love you too. You're going to love yourself. And we're going to help you through this.
In the center, everybody's assistance. I can go to any one of my peers and say, look, I'm feeling anxious today, and they say, do you need to talk? And I can talk it out. I feel good about me. You know, I finally learned how to love myself through Sisters and Fellow Sisters. And I've actually stopped taking my nighttime meds. I can go home and go to sleep on my own. And that's something that's very new.
Community Connections is a mental health agency, but it also sees itself as a social change agency, where people make efforts to do things differently.
Her spirit was since Christ. Her spirit was since Christ. I used for 32 years. I don't never want to get high again. Right now, I'm safe. But I have a sponsor. I do step work. I go to meetings. And I do the same thing I did as I first came in to recover. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Therapy is an evolving science. Every time we learn something new, we modify what we had before, and we have a transformed product.
This place has really made me feel good about myself. I was on my way there, and a neighbor asked, was I going to work? I'm going to a women's center. It's helping me get myself together.
Sisters Empowering Sisters adds another piece. It adds the personal experience piece. It adds the you will learn from me because I've been there piece.
I love coming here to Sisters Empowering Sisters because you guys empower me every day that I come in these doors.
Do I think Sisters Empowering Sisters is the last step along this road? No, I do not. But I think for us at Community Connections, it is the next step.
I just want to say that I'm so grateful to be in Sisters Empowering Sisters because I can go downstairs and outside and say, oh, I'm in Sisters Empowering Sisters. Oh, that's a great group I heard.